if someone was playing the saxophone, they're going like this along with them, and the kids who were drumming, the other kids were using their fingers to follow along. It was so cool. Say what? Nothing to show the perfect stuff. This was just the extra stuff.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to call to order and welcome you to the Hampton-Wilbraham Regional School District School Committee meeting. It is 6:38 p.m. Is anyone here recording the meeting besides David Sanders from Wilbraham Public Access? We will do roll call in alphabetical order. Bill Bontempi?
Here.
Cheryl Caruana?
Here.
Sean Kennedy?
Here.
Patrick Tiernan?
Present.
Lisa Murray? Maura Ryan?
Here.
Michelle Boudreau? Here. Would you please stand? So we just know for
Behind you, Joe.
Sorry, there's a couple of them.
Take your pick. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So first I'd like to thank Green Meadows for hosting us this evening for our school committee meeting. And we will begin with the student report. We have Molly Brewer here with us this evening. Thanks, Molly.
Hey, Molly.
Hello. Let's get started with our evening of recognition that happened last night. Underclassmen first, seniors second. So lots of fun happening. I saw some familiar faces there. Seniors' last day is also coming up, May 26th. Can't wait. Student Council is having their end of the year banquet, I think right now, if not in the next 30 minutes. MCAS happened this week for our sophomores. They had math. Student Council is running a Kiss a Senior Goodbye fundraiser for graduation. Senior prom is also approaching, May 30th. Graduation is the second. The Fine Arts Festival just happened. So band, chorus, and like the art department at Minnetonka presented their work. Minnetonka, the senior class, also hosted a Meet the Candidate Day, so asked a bunch of student-generated questions to people running for the Board of Selectmen and school committee. A lot of fun. I was asking some questions. And then Adopt a Senior is still happening. 65 people still need their adoption to go through. And this is my last school committee meeting, so it's been good.
Does anyone have any questions for Molly?
You know, you can always come back.
Come
School
on.
breaks, holidays, these meetings still happen.
I'll swing by.
So Molly, on behalf of the school committee, we do have something here for you. So thank you so much for being our student representative, and we wish you the best of luck for the remainder of your senior year and next year.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
I hear that there's no sound being put through on Zoom.
Thanks, Bob.
Bye.
Thanks, Molly.
Bye.
See you at graduation.
Yeah, see you at graduation.
So we will continue with new business. We'll begin with the class of 2023 cohort study, so I'll pass that off to you, John.
Thank you very much. At last meeting, I was asked to take a look at our current group of seniors, and I think the essence of the question was essentially why the group of students that you end up with seniors is not the same as the group you started with as freshmen 4 years ago. So I went through the cohort and was able to track down most of the students. We started in 2019-20 with 257 ninth graders. 11 of those moved prior to the October 1st count for next year. Of those 11, 8 transferred to another Massachusetts public school, 2 moved out of state, 1 dropped out. Now, next year, There were some unaccounted for students. This was the time of COVID, and there just were some records that I couldn't find. We began the year with 146, and 9 we know moved out or left the cohort. 4 moved to another Massachusetts public school. 1 moved out of state. 3 enrolled in private school. 1 was homeschooled. If you recall, there was a phenomenon happening at the time of students leaving public schools for private schools and parochial schools because many of them were in session while many of the public schools were out of session. So that brings you to 237, but the actual October count for that year was 231, so there were 6 that I couldn't find records for anywhere, just unaccounted for. But going with 231 moving forward, we know that another 10 left the cohort in the 11th grade year, 3 transferred to other Massachusetts public schools, 3 moved out of state, 3 enrolled in private school, 1 dropped out, and 6 joined the district. So that brought the total to 227. Then 12th grade year, we had 19 students who left through a variety of reasons. 2 transferred to another Massachusetts public school. 1 of those was a virtual school. 4 moved out of state. 2 enrolled in private school. 10 obtained early graduation, so are no longer counted in that cohort. 1 dropped out, and 10 students joined. So looking at the history, in the first year, 11 students left. In the second year, 15 students left, 6 of which are unknown reasons. In year 3, 11 students left and 7 joined. And then this current year, 9 students left, 10 joined, and 10 attained early graduation. So the totals for transferring to other Massachusetts public schools, I assume most of those were families whose town moved, students whose families moved to another town in Massachusetts was 17. Those who obtained early graduation was 10. Those who moved to another state was 10. 8 enrolled in private school, 6 again at unknown reasons, 3 dropped out, and 1 was homeschooled. So I think that sort of takes you through the cohort. I don't know if that leaves any questions related to that matter.
The 17, whoa, that's loud, sorry. 17, are those school choice transfers or are those moved to another town?
I believe they're mostly moved to another town because we did double check this against the choice list.
Okay,
And the only student I found was the 1 in the virtual school.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for doing that. That's helpful.
Thank you, John.
Mhm.
Anyone else? Thank you. We'll move on to the school improvement plan. So I'd like to invite the elementary, middle, and high school administrators to the table. Thank you for being here with us tonight.
Make sure people have some come-up music for you guys.
We'll have a dance too.
Yeah.
All right, so I have the privilege of going first. So first I just want to explain, it's our understanding that you have the whole improvement plan in front of you that's pretty lengthy. We worked together to compile a list of where we are with that plan, and I've included it in the packets in terms of what's completed and what's ongoing, and a few places, no action. What we're going to share verbally is some places where we feel like we wanted to highlight both, at each level, the elementary, middle, and high level. And we'll do that in each of the 3 categories, but certainly ask us questions along the way or at the end or whatever, we're all ready to answer them. And so I'll start off with an academic update here with Allison. And so first I just want to highlight one place that we feel really proud at the elementary level is we have done a ton of work in the academic area, especially around providing professional development for teachers and collaboration opportunities. This was...
Actually, just excuse me, there's still no audio. We have people here, but we also have people
And you
online.
could also direct them, Sean, if they'd like to go onto our live stream, the audios, if they want to switch to the
Okay.
live stream, the video on the live stream,
Could you let them know that?
Yes.
Maybe put a little message in. I'm sorry to interrupt you, I just think it's important that everyone hear you.
I agree, Sean. Are you okay if I go on?
I'm very okay.
Okay. So, like I said, a lot of PD and collaboration activities. This was both in relationship to our new curriculum materials for CKLA and illustrative mathematics, both training and development of that, but also we did a series in each of our schools really unpacking the units, and in that case we did them collaboratively, like Green Meadows and Seoul, for example, just combined together to unpack particular units at particular levels, and that was true K-5. As well as continue to do math labs this spring, which is really looking at model lessons and seeing them interact, and we did that with CQLA as well. So just a ton of PD as they implemented curriculum, which we feel really proud of, and of course we'll continue as we continue to work.
So my task is to sort of share a little bit about that ongoing work and what steps we will continue to implement as we move forward. So all of the professional learning that took place over the course of the past couple of years has really been targeted towards our Tier 1 instruction, that curriculum that we purchased to amplify CKLA, illustrative math. The next steps that we need to focus on not only are continued PD at that Tier 1 level, which we will do, but also working towards professional learning around providing Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions and supports for students so that we can make sure we're targeting all learners. That MTSS model is something that we're pushing forward with, and we can provide teachers with the learning for that now that our Tier 1 professional learning has been complete. In a sense, that's ongoing indefinitely, obviously. So those things will stay on our school improvement plans as we move forward at the elementary level to continue the collaboration and professional learning, but to implement MTSS models and target the Tier 2 and 3. So those are the kind of the highlights from that Goal 1 academic at the elementary level. Obviously, there's other things in here that we've worked on, so if there's more questions about that, we're happy to respond.
So from the middle level, I think I would echo what Allison said in terms of the ongoing needs or goals. From the math lens, we've been blessed to have Lisa and the coaches and Sarah Bent work with all of our math teachers on every PD day this year, I think every PD year. So that's been a blessing. We started with IM in 6th grade this year. We'll move to 7th grade next year. Literacy will begin with the K-6 literacy coaches. They'll be meeting with our staff for the first time this year, which is great. So we'll have, in terms of the goal being a vertical alignment, this is really the step that we need to get going so that when our kids are coming from Sewell or Green Meadows, there's a common language, a common vocabulary that they're using. In terms of the highlights, things that we're proud of, some of you with 8th grade students have seen the work that they've done with the civics projects. It's interesting to watch both the ups and downs. Some of them are learning that while they're trying to communicate with outside sources and people in the community, they're not always responded to, so that's part of the process as well. But they've ranged in topics from trying to add solar panels to our roof, to supporting single parents, to service dogs, to replacing basketball hoops. And the process they go through, we started and purchased civics books, which is in the goal, and use that guidebook for purposes of really learning how to be more civically engaged. And the second piece I would add that is from Goal 1 that's important for us to recognize is the project Lead the Way grant money that was secured is pretty common, but we also combine that with a What grant to purchase tablets so that the 8th grade computer science class added an app creator module, so they're working on that in 8th grade computer science, so that's exciting stuff as well. That's Goal 1 for middle school.
Can I just ask a real quick question? So I really enjoy getting the emails about the civics, and I wonder if there might be some consideration made to communicating out to the community that the 8th graders, even if it's at the beginning of the school year, that the 8th graders are going to participate in a project, they'll reach out to, whether it's community members, school committee members, educators, just so that people have an idea, so that I would love to participate more I don't want to give them too much information and overwhelm them, you know, as an adult to a student. But I think it's also helpful to understand what the goal of what they're trying to do is besides just adding solar panels. Because I have to imagine there's a little bit more to that, like dialed in.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I can certainly try and communicate that better. I think where the limitations exist for them is their email addresses don't send and receive to outside the district. So we tried to provide them with, so in the case of the solar panels, I gave them Mike Messier and Dave Rogers information so they could communicate with them. We did make a rule, they weren't allowed to fundraise in the school because there'd be, 200 kids running around trying to raise money for whatever they wanted to do.
Yeah.
So I think it's a matter of learning, but it's a great point.
Otherwise, I think it's really great to see them reaching out. I mean, I don't want to speak on behalf of everybody on the school committee, but I appreciate the fact that they reach out to me and ask me questions, and just to see where they're at, what they're learning, even their style of what's important to them.
I was surprised at some of the topics that specific kids picked. I was really shocked by some of them, in a good way.
Thank you.
I have a question, John. In terms of thank you. In terms of just carrying on continuity, I'm really glad that sixth grade will have, is it IM? I think so.
They started,
Yeah.
yep.
What are you doing in the ELA?
So that's something that we've met about. I think the 26th, they're gonna start to look at amplifying similar stuff that they're doing at the elementaries.
So you are going to go into this one?
Yeah, we're gonna take a look. I think if it's successful for the other schools, then we need to look at how does it fit into our school, but the more aligned we are, the better our kids are gonna be. So
I agree.
That's real.
Thank you.
Hello, good evening. Just thinking about everything that we've gotten done this year has been nice to reflect on. Sometimes you don't, you're just in the middle of it all year long, and you finally pause to take a look. So one of the things I'm focusing on here tonight is the academic goal that Minnetonka has in the school improvement plan. And one of the things we are extremely proud of, and anyone that works in a large organization would understand this, is that we have completed stage 1 of our NEASC accreditation. All of Minnetonka's courses have a written curriculum that is in the same template. It's curated in a centralized format. So anything and everything is all finally there in one nice place. And that's huge. I think in another element, I'm just going to kind of rattle off what I'm proud of first. Why not? A second thing here was the implementation of our pilot co-teaching at Minnetonka, the program. This year we piloted with 1 section of a math class and 4 sections in English. 3 of those English were in the freshman literature and composition, and 1 was in the junior level nature lit course. And if you don't know a lot about co-teaching, it's been really amazing, and we've just surveyed everyone involved in that to get some feedback for even more improvement and growth in it, and that the students have the luxury of having 2 teachers who are instructing them. They've been through a training, they have common planning time, they design lessons together, and that's from a lens of both a regular educator and a special educator. And so in doing that, the feedback that I have gotten is that it's very exciting to be able to have someone there who maybe if you're not connecting or reaching or teaching in a manner that is helping, the other person probably has a different angle on that, and it's made it very beneficial. So I'm excited to move forward next year with an expansion of that. And so that includes 2 math, 6 English sections, and 1 biology to see how that can move forward. So that's what we're looking forward to there. And last thing in my brag bag here is the tutoring program throughout the school year in math, English, and biology. This year, we did successfully tutor over 50 students preparing for their MCAS, and that's beyond the in-school time, in the classrooms that they may receive. But this Tier 2 intervention style allows them to get the tutoring while they're in school. It's a limited time frame, and it's easier. It's not just easier to have them while they're there, but to try chasing them down after 2:10, that's another story. So looking forward in that, and even went so far, a couple of our biology teachers have been trying out a biology IXL program, and I know that that's used in other schools. And we have it in our math department too. Biology is looking at it to see how that might be useful there. And I think what we are looking forward to in future growth is completing our vision of the graduate. That's really focused on all of the competencies that Minnechaug graduates will have the internal capacity to rely on. And the department's working on breaking down what all of that means, outlining how they're going to be developed throughout their 4-year curriculum is a large task, but that is something that we are looking forward to. Any questions on that?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
I was very impressed with the foreign language that you've changed to a more conversational piece, but I'm wondering, does that prepare them for if they take a foreign language when they get to college? Are they then in the mainstream, or are they a little behind because they didn't do the intensive vocabulary building? I'm just curious if you've looked at that.
All right, so we're offering next year the conversations in Italian, that format, is that what you're referring to, versus the traditional, which is now not really traditional so much, it's proficiency-based model. But the conversations in Italian is what we're offering, and if they were to, I'm assuming that you can jump into, but moving into the collegiate level, just having a conversations course is not going to prepare you for an Italian 1 course, for example. So the conversational courses are more about going to places and having enough of a skill set to be able to have conversations, to get where you need to go, to do the things that you want to do, versus going into it in depth, including all of the functions of grammar and vocabulary and structure.
So are you saying that our undergraduates have the ability to take a more traditional language course that has the conjugation of verbs and that kind of thing? Or the just the typical, let's see how far you can get just if you're dropped in the country and you have to use your language?
Yeah, I do think it's important to know that when you're doing the proficiency model of instruction, you don't abandon all conjugation.
Right.
However, you may not, I remember my high school experience was you had 80 verbs and you had to conjugate them in all different things, and you would do that, for months at a time and barely do any speaking. I think the proficiency model of instruction, which we received a grant for this year from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to expand that model even more. And the department's also offering grants to explore that proficiency-based instructional mode in traditional content as well. We haven't gotten there yet, but definitely jumped on the foreign language proficiency model. It allows for and encourages more reading, writing, speaking, communicating. That would be more useful for them. We don't have any specific data on students that have taken 4 years. We're in our first full year of rollout in it, but no data on what that means for them when they go to college if they want to study foreign language. Most of the time, if they've taken, let's say, 4 years of a foreign language and they're not studying language in college, they're probably taking a cultural class versus a Spanish 6 class, if that's not what they're studying. If they are going into international affairs and they want to pursue that even further, then they're probably continuing their study. But we don't have any data on how our proficiency model is translating into college curriculum. I will say that what we are seeing is greater success with the seal of biliteracy testing. So the state offers a seal of biliteracy testing that we started about 3 years ago, and we are starting to see more students reach that biliteracy mark. It's been a slow rollout, but there are more passing that test.
Thank you.
Can I just add, sorry, tying back to the goal that they've been including the middle school Spanish teachers in their meetings and in the grant process.
See.
So Cheryl, I would share, I was pretty critical when this was discussed, that change last year, and so Nikki rightfully called me to the carpet and said, why don't you come sit in one of the classes? I would share that it was far more robust than the typical AR-ER style of conjugation and learning. And I think that if we look at it, it goes back to the question of what do we value? Is the goal to have a student do incredibly well in a course, or is it for them to be conversational in a foreign language? And so we really, as a committee and future committees, need to help define that, because I think what the kids are receiving is actually a better overall experience if the goal is for them to speak a foreign language, to understand a foreign language, and to understand the culture behind it than the way we've traditionally handled it. Thank you for calling me the carpet.
Okay, hi everybody. So we're going to bring it back down to the building blocks of all of this great stuff by talking about elementary school again. And goal 2 is our social emotional goal. And you know, we've faced some big hurdles in these past few years of the school improvement plan, going through the tail end of COVID and dealing with the aftermath of what that meant to our students and their social emotional status. You know, it really took quite a hit. So there's not a lot of action steps on this goal, as many as they were in the academic, but as we know, to be successful academically, you have to be able to access the curriculum, you know, mentally and emotionally. So we consider this very, very important, and we're very proud of the work that our elementary schools have done. So to start off with the first action step, which is really about how we are using data, all of our elementary schools have very strong, effective climate teams who work diligently to analyze our SABRS data, our SWIS data, identify students who are at risk, and then develop supports and interventions to help those students in their overall well-being. Some of the things that we've done and continue to do are the check-in, check-out system. We've done it informally at different levels over the years, but I think we're more thoughtful and deliberate with that now, very targeted with the specific students that we're using that we think are going to benefit from that system. We also were able, Gina Roy was able to hire an ETL, educational team leader, that shared between Stony Hill and Sewell Road. And with that, it freed up our school psychologists a little bit. And with that time that they've had, they've also been taking some students that are identified through our SABRS data and pulling them for what might seem very informal, like a lunch bunch, but is really very targeted and deliberate on helping build the skills that those students are lagging in. We also are helping teachers help students. So we have SEL CPTs, which are curriculum planning times. We have faculty meetings where we constantly are reviewing responsive classroom practices. And at the CPTs, we're listening to teachers and the difficulties that they're having with children in the classroom behaviorally, and giving them tools and supports that they can then bring to the classroom to handle those kids in the moment. Of course, we have assemblies and spirit days, you know, that continues, but it's been nice to be able to get together again, and it's been nice, you know, to be able to have your whole school collectively wearing whatever crazy shirts and hats that they're wearing. One thing that we're working on for the future growth is actually going to start before the end of the school year. We are looking at a PBIS self-assessment survey that we're going to use our STAT teams and our climate teams to really analyze what are our current resources, how are we using them, are we using them well, do we need more, and what are our systems that we have in place to actually roll out some of those resources. The results of that self-assessment is really going to help guide our next steps. As Allison mentioned earlier, working toward an MTSS model of support, we want to be able to lay the foundation for us to grow and develop so that we are doing the very best we can at all levels in all tiered support, tier 1, 2, and 3. The next action step that we have is really about review, revise tier 1 and 2 resources and curriculum offerings. And the very first thing that you might notice on there is that we all had additional school adjustment counselors. That was from the ESSER funds, which we know are ending this year. But those counselors were really pivotal in helping us with one of our main goals, which was rolling out Second Steps program K to 5. And they were that bridge that helped the teachers get better acclimated with the program. So sometimes the counselors were helping the teachers in the classroom teach those lessons, implement those lessons. Some of the schools are already, the teachers are fully implementing the Second Steps lessons. So we feel really happy that Second Steps is fully now K to 5. And what we'd like to move toward is having all classroom teachers implementing their own Second Steps lessons, and also looking more closely at how that can help us with tier 2 intervention. It's being done at different levels at different schools, but I think we want to look at how it aligns with some of the proven programs we already have, Responsive Classroom being one of them, but we have others too, and we want to see, you know, where they overlap and where they complement one another so that we can get the most bang for our buck out of all of those wonderful programs. And finally, the last action step that I'll speak to before we get on to the high school is providing staff with training and resources to support all other areas of student wellness. With our new curriculum, Amplify CKLA, it's been a wonderful exploration and discovery to see how greatly different groups are represented in the stories that children are reading. Children are seeing children and adults who look like them. And so that has been wonderful for us to, you know, to be able to experience. However, we don't feel like that work is done. We can always do more, we can always do better, but at least now we have a curriculum in place that is going to lead us there and not be something that we have to fight against. We've also looked at our library selections and said, how can we do better there? How can we be more thoughtful in our choices of the books that we're bringing into our library? So again, there's a better selection for our students. We also have created a flow chart that I think has been shared throughout all the schools and how teachers are responding to some of their major behaviors. And I bring that up here because that's been some PD for staff. And what that means is that you might have a student who's doing this particular behavior. One teacher handles it one way, another teacher handles it another way. This has sort of streamlined it so there's a flow chart so everybody's on the same page. What we're still looking to do is continue to develop and enhance how we are being more culturally responsive. And the last thing I wanted to bring up, just because it's a nice little addition, is I know it's talking about other areas of student wellness. And if you've been around elementary schools lately, you know that recess is typically a time where problems can arise, those unstructured environments. And I know that some of the schools have shared some of the enhancements and, you know, new things that they've brought into their recess time. And I wanted to mention and give a shout out to the WHAT grant that Stony Hill got. And one of the things, it's a recess overhaul in general, but one of the main things that I love is a peace path. And the peace path is a stencil that is painted on the ground, and it has a star with 2 feet on each side. And it walks students through sort of a mediation of conflict resolution. So there's little prompts at each step. I feel blame when you, and I didn't know that you felt this, and how about we do this, and it walks them through that. So we're just in the beginning stages of that, but it's already proven to be very helpful, helping the kids get more independent with their conflict resolution. So overall, I think that this has been a really important piece of how we get the academic success, and so, yeah, out of all the elementary schools. Thank you.
So for goal number 2, I think where we recall back to the start of the school year when the superintendent shared the vocal data and some of our challenges at the level. We are faced with significant social, emotional, behavioral concerns. We have found as a staff that we've reviewed the data and looked at what the challenges are. we have attempted to, through the last several months, develop action steps that we can implement at the start of next school year to try and curb some of these concerns. We have found that second step needs to be heavily modified to fit into the schedule that we have, so it's not as effective as it could be. I think we need to look, at least in our building, we need to look at either developing in-house plans so we can target certain behaviors that are more frequent than others. Discrimination is something that we're faced with on almost a daily basis. And so targeting those things prior to the tier 1, but also having some resources available so after the fact so that we can educate. And then I know that my 2 assistant principals, Jake and Katie, have spent a lot of time looking at mediation and working with our counselors. And we need to develop some restorative practices and think a little bit differently. So that's our ongoing challenge. We do have some concerns behaviorally that we need to think differently and address them. The steps that we have taken, and again, referring back to the data that's available, is some of the sharing from students and parents was that there wasn't enough opportunity to recognize the good that was done from the kids. And so we've kind of, our climate team spent a lot of time, I'm very proud of them and our staff in general, rebranding, looking at, they had a REACH program before, but not one kid knew what it meant, not one staff member could tell me what it stood for. So we simplified that. It's all over the building now, the WMS. And then they created an incentive program both for conduct for students, which is supported by the PTO, and where the teachers put on a report card for student conduct. We've given them time during the week to make positive phone calls to families rather than just, the uh-oh every time the phone rings and it shows Wilbraham Middle School. And that's been met with a lot of success. I think parents, they want to hear that the kids are doing the right thing. We've expanded our Student of the Month program, and while that happens, we invite families in to meet with the teachers and talk about their kids. Our staff is also presenting to other students on that team kindness, respect, some of the core values that we have. They've done a tremendous amount of work, and I'm incredibly proud of the climate team and the staff in that area. So.
Could you give us just a thumbnail sketch of what the hurdles are for discrimination at the middle school?
What the hurdles are? So we see homophobic comments. We see a lot of racial comments. We see a lot of
I'm sorry, you see it written in the walls or?
No, it's verbal. It's kids are saying to other kids. They're calling them. It's a tremendous amount of social media stuff as well, but it carries over into recess, into the hallways. And so, again, on a daily basis, we're investigating and getting witness statements, and it's we're trying to hit it hard in different ways, and it's we've enlisted. Recently, there was a parent whose child was on the receiving end of comments, but also was making comments to other kids. And she's a social worker. She's agreed to come in and meet with some of our students, so she's been great. But again, the more resources we can identify in the community to come join us, the better. I think schools are a reflection of the society that we live in, and this is it's not unique to us, but there are kids. So.
Do you have access to the school resource officer?
We do. He's yes, he was there today.
I know we're up against it, so I'm going to fly through goal 2. In 2021, we first explored using the BEST screening system, which is behavioral and emotional screening system. This year, we expanded it in frequency and grade level. What that does is it gives you an immediate dashboard of which students are in most need of help. And it does it in a red, yellow, green format so that we can see the red kids immediately, work with the yellow kids over time, and take a look at the percentage of green over time as we're going through that. So we did that. We've expanded the role of mediation and conflict resolution that John was talking about and seen a reduction in our suspension practices as a result. We've really, for the last 2 years, have done a lot of work around culturally proficient teaching. Our school staff has been reading Zaretta Hammond's book this year called Culturally Proficient Teaching and the Brain. And we've been taking chapters of it at a time at faculty meetings to delve deeper. This coming Monday, we have an outside resource coming in to specifically talk about microaggressions and how teachers can respond appropriately to microaggressions, because the educators out there are scared. They're scared to say the wrong thing when something like that comes up into their classroom, because they don't want to end up on TikTok or YouTube. They're scared of being audio recorded, they're scared of being video recorded. So we need to give them as many resources as possible as to how to appropriately respond. This year we also redesigned our Pride Pin program. We used to have Pride Pins, teachers would nominate kids for doing something good. We talked to the climate team really blew that out. This year we recognized over 60 staff and over 425 individual students during the program. In fact, Superintendent Provost got a Pride Pin at our last assembly. And during the month of March, we do a March Madness. Teachers were challenged to do positive phone calls home, and as a staff, we did 385 positive phone calls just in the month of March. One of our future growth items that we'd really like to explore, in fact, maybe it's something appropriate to share with middle school levels, is we'd like to explore community service element to discipline. But we don't want to say, Nikki's in trouble, you get 10 hours of community service, and now Nikki goes home and goes, oh, how do I do it? Where do I do it? Who's checking off that I did it? We want to have someone on staff be the coordinator of it, set up relationships with community agencies, bring the kid to the community service, supervise it, etc., so that it's more real and functional. So that's something that we're looking at, funding sources for how we might be able to do that. Because I think service to the community could be a really good alternative to suspension. And that's goal 2 for the high school.
Good evening.
Steve, looking at the goal 2 for the high school, it looks like no action was taken in 3 different areas. Is that because it was no longer deemed necessary funding or lack of funding, or another reason why it didn't move forward?
We didn't hire a full-time health teacher because as we prepared for our budget, we had a $1 million shortfall and had to develop a plan. Thankfully, we didn't have to go through it, of reducing $400,000. So that's why we didn't hire a health teacher. We haven't begun to collect data on homework. That was something that we wanted to do, we just haven't had time to do it. I think that was the only.
Then explore the use of iBlock.
Oh, the iBlock. Yeah, we've just been using our advisory period for that iBlock, and that iBlock software also comes with a price tag of $10,000 to $15,000.
So it sounds like funding for 2 out of 3.
Oh.
Perfect. Thanks.
I did get a call from a student about homework. I got an email from a student about homework. I did suggest that he go to you first with his plan.
Okay. Happy to meet you.
Good evening, everyone. Goal 3 is our safety goal. It's one of our priorities across all of our buildings. This year, we are very excited to move away from talking about COVID safety and kind of getting back to business with our regular safety measures. We've been able to continue to secure safety liaisons in our building. We have one sitting here, Mrs. Donovan. They do very important work. They come together monthly or regularly to meet with the other seat district members. They are the liaison. They share communication with staff, and their role is very important. We've been very fortunate to be able to have safety liaisons across all of our buildings because the work they do is really invaluable.
The other thing that we've been able to do, and we're proud of being able to train our own district staff, this is Donovan this year, is one of the staff members that was trained in crisis prevention intervention training. So she's an in-house district trainer, so that has been a great addition. Probably the work that we're most proud of this year is being able to really look close at our school reunification plans across the elementary schools, and Green Meadows included. We've been able to really share various resources. We've trained staff. We've practiced in our buildings more than once. It's one thing to have a plan, a written plan. It's another thing to actually practice the plan. And so we've been able to do that. We've been able to ask questions. We've been able to refine the plan. We hope to never have to use the plan, but we are certainly in a place that we are prepared should we ever need to use the plan. We've identified on-campus and off-campus reunification sites. The work that we hope to do in the year ahead is focusing on, we have a draft written of the emergency information guide for families, but we really need to tweak it, and we want to make sure that it's consistent across buildings. The one other action step that we will need to continue to work on is when we thought about things that we wanted to accomplish in this plan cycle, we thought about wanting to make sure that we had communication templates to families should we ever need them. I think we can all speak to an incident or two where something happens and we have to get out quick communication to families. And we do want to make sure that these situations can be potentially very stressful, and we want to be able to proactively think about, should we need a communication. So being able to think through that in a thoughtful way, kind of ahead of time, is the work that we'll continue to do in the upcoming year.
Sharon, do you think there's any safety hazard posed by just the one entrance and exit from your building? You kind of funnel all the cars. If there was a time that you wanted to get kids off campus, kind of funnel everything through that one.
I think John DeRosa can speak to this better than I can. Definitely something to rethink, Cheryl. And I'm not kidding when I say that. I think John was able to kind of experience that this year when he was trying to reunify his students with their families. And, from what I understand, there was a traffic jam. We do have a couple of different exit areas. We haven't given thought to that, but we probably should. I don't know if the other administrators have had an opportunity to think about that, but I think you raise a really good point. If we have to reunify 325 students all at the same time, what does that end up looking like? I'm sure John has some lessons learned that he can speak to.
That's kind of like, the ongoing work.
Go ahead.
So, so part of the planning over the last couple of years is, develop and be ready for a reunification in the event that you need it. And then we had a pipe burst in the building, which we needed it quicker than we thought we were going to need it. So learning on the fly, learning what works about the physical building and the facility itself was invaluable to us. So I'm incredibly proud of the way that our staff responded. But we learned a lot of lessons at the time. We had kids called out one at a time. We sort of shifted on the fly and moved to different processes that were working a little bit more efficiently. The high school was ready to receive us when they needed to. So there was a lot of different learning opportunities, both with the flood and then I think Monique and I had about an hour and a half without power, which is fun with 700 people in your building without power. So we learned a lot there too in terms of the communication. So as Sharon mentioned, communication is trying to get things out. In my particular building, cell service is almost non-existent to the point where you have to be in certain parts of the building in order to get service. So we added, district phones with Wi-Fi calling. When you don't have power, Wi-Fi doesn't work, so you can't call. You can't email because you don't have power. So trying to communicate in that sense was a real challenge. We were able to identify our radios, again, in certain parts of the building don't work. So again, our challenges are the physical building. We need more cameras, which is in the process. And there's some great funding from Comm that's going to support that, which is great. But the learn on the fly after action meetings that we had with Superintendent Steve joined us, the learning that took place there was tremendous. With the bomb threat last year, which I think a lot of schools did. So we've been able to gather what works and what doesn't. We've got a lot of work to do, but I think putting some of those lessons learned into place is going to be valuable to us moving forward.
Great, thank you.
When you lost power, did the lights go up? Not to belittle the pipe breaking, but that was a really good process, I think, for all of us, Sharon, and Mrs. Donovan, and John and I, we all learned a lot that day. Also, Dan Menard has been a really good addition. He has successfully negotiated a new relocation spot for our school. We're typically the relocation spot for all the other schools, but we needed a spot. And when he looked at the United Church, he's like, I don't think you can fit there. So he negotiated and got us a contract with Wolverhampton Academy and using their gym area, where I think we can all fit in successfully. So next year, the plan is to actually do one at the academy, working with their schedule for what that would look like and relocate the entire school. Also, our internal and external process for emergency response protocols. I think we're above 30 ambulances this year for some medically fragile students and staff, and we have that down to a science now. So feel really good about that. Our planning around the swatting calls that were going around in Massachusetts and beyond is really challenging to plan for those because when the swatting calls were happening, the threat was outside your building. And when you have a nice day like today, any given time, I might have 100, 150 students outside the building. Yoga class, phys ed class, science classes, etc. When the weather gets nice, everyone likes to go outside. So how do we plan for that? What are our protocols if we were to get a swatting call at that moment? So we developed some good plans, good procedures around that, and knock on wood, we haven't had to use those protocols, but we're ready. I think future growth areas for us is to continue to work with the two towns around capital improvements for Manchac, especially when it deals with safety issues. And we're hopeful that maybe in the fall we can continue that work. And then I think Sharon mentioned the creation of communication templates that all schools can use for different scenarios so that when it happens to you, you don't have to go searching. You'll be able to customize that template.
Any questions?
Just if I could go back to the one, back to the first goal. Resources needed, looking at the geometry text, algebra 1 textbooks. I can't remember, I thought there were some textbooks that were on the chopping block, but I can't remember if they were the math textbooks. Are those in the budget for next year? Do we know? I know Aaron's in math.
We, one of the things that we reduced was some funds for the textbook line, but it will not affect the buying the middle school math that they need. So we're purchasing a digital platform. That's the plan. We have a grant that we're applying for, so fingers crossed we get it, but I do have the money in the budget to cover that, so it's not
that the middle school math won't be compromised.
So has that digital platform been reviewed by the curriculum subcommittee so that we as a school committee can make sure that that's approved?
It's
A lot of it doesn't seem to me like there's been a lot of curriculum subcommittee meetings. We haven't really talked about the programs that have been added this year. We've talked about some of the success of the testing, but if you're adding different things and moving things around, I just think we should know about that.
Yeah, it's, the platform that we're using is, it's still illustrative math, it's just a different digital platform that we looked at with the middle school teachers, and did kind of a materials review, looking at different priorities in terms of what makes the most sense, what they felt that they needed, with the understanding that illustrative and problem-based math was how we were moving forward. So, but we haven't brought it to the curriculum sub in the way that you're speaking.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we need to bring it, if it's part of the package that was originally, purchased under a grant. If it was significantly different, yes. But, are you saying it's not significantly different?
It's not. It's based on the illustrative math that, it's just a different publisher that's producing the materials, and they have a more user-friendly, robust digital platform that teachers felt would work a lot better. Kids wouldn't be tethered to workbooks. They would be able to do digital, do some of their math work digitally, and also traditionally paper and pencil. So it was definitely preferred over what some of the sixth grade teachers had tried this year.
And support for the staff, is it part and parcel of both the online and the textbook?
There will be training specifically for the new platform, so they had a chance to do some of the professional development regarding building thinking in mathematics class. Sixth grade also did some training with our coaches around using the illustrative materials that we had, that we still have. And then we will be planning some professional development so that teachers are familiar with the platform, feel good about it, and then in an ongoing way, so they'll know how to use all the features of it.
I think maybe before the end of the year, we could look at some of that. I'd like to see the training. I think that would be interesting, and that we could bring it back to the full committee. I don't think it needs a vote. It's just illuminates us as to what's going on.
Yeah, I can keep you updated on when we have the training planned and the information on that. We don't have anything scheduled that's just yet.
Okay.
Coming.
Thank you.
Just one point I'd like to bring up. When you said at the middle school that you don't have cell phone coverage and stuff like that, has public safety come in and tested their communications inside the building? So if your building, if there are issues with public safety communications in your building, there's something that they can do about that. Okay, they call bidirectional amplifiers and.
Yes, I don't know what's been discussed. What we have is one of the specific channels on our radio goes directly to the PD as well.
And it works all throughout the building. Great. Thank you.
I'm only asking members of the school committee because when they did the safety audit, do you guys recall anything ever being said during the safety audit last year, the year before, about there being a communication issue of being able to access radios or anything when they did that audit? I'm just curious if that ever came up.
No.
I don't believe so.
Because it may be something you want to make sure that when they do the audit, they test that to make sure.
Yeah.
It's been in the middle school audit for the last couple of years.
As a problem or as a?
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
You stand right next to the flagpole.
You have to grab onto it.
Yeah.
We can talk offline.
Thank you very much.
So, sorry, one quick thing. For future school committees, if you look at academics, 60% of the goals are tied to the MCAS. And so it goes back to the question of what do we value? And are we defining MCAS results as the way that we will define academic success, excellence, achievement? Absent that, I think it leaves our leaders no option but to use the MCAS results as their measuring stick. And so when new committee starts next year, we would encourage that to be something you look at very early, so that you don't want MCAS results to be the way that education success is measured. There's a clear measuring stick that folks can use and that can build plans that reflect and support that.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, Steve, you're up next.
All right.
Yeah, go on.
Guidance update.
Hey, John, I had asked previous administration, no, Dr. Provost, that we should have a formula, let's say that X percent of MCAS plus X percent of whatever other tools that we want to use to come up with what we think will give us the best picture of what our students are doing. And then we can go back in time and apply that same formula and see how we've improved or how we've not improved. I know everyone says MCAS is one particular test on one particular day and such, but it's the same day for everybody, right? Or at least that's how they're doing it for the grade. So it would be nice to have a formula where it shows us, what's important, what percent of MCAS is important, and to give us a total picture. And that way we can even apply it to other schools around that same formula just for us, so we can see how we're doing with them, instead of having U.S. World and News Report, thank you, have them do it, we do it, and I think that would just be helpful.
Sure, I appreciate that comment. I think that was part of my rationale for presenting the accountability data the way I did this year.
Yes.
So that, the academic achievement testing was important, but it wasn't the whole ball of wax. I think in terms of, refining that going forward, we can certainly think about different ways we can present that. When we, a couple of months ago, discussed bringing in a new survey that looks at different metrics of school quality. You should fit that into it as well. Back testing will be a little bit hard because some of the tests that we might be using and some of the measures we might be using might not have prior data, but at least give us a baseline moving forward.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
John, can something similar be considered for some of the social and emotional? We've heard tonight that there are dashboards that they're kind of reviewing. Again, it doesn't have to necessarily be a number per se of like how many students out of a cohort that are impacted, just to get the idea of how many maybe students we're seeing red, yellow, or green, and then year to year, just because it gives some data to say how you're addressing it. Saying the beginning of the school year, and then when you're doing the school improvement, you can at least provide that data and say, this is kind of where we started out, and this is how we improved throughout the year.
Yeah.
Just something to consider.
I'm just curious, Lisa, are the elementary and middle school at least doing savers for social emotional?
K through 8.
And we keep that data?
Great. So Superintendent Brewer was told me there was some question about what is developmental guidance. That is in the program of studies listed with our phys ed classes and health classes. So developmental guidance is the mass model of school counseling, and it covers the different aspects that our guidance team uses to teach curriculum to students, to see students individually, and to deliver services to families and groups of students. So to break it down, and I'm sorry I didn't get it to you on Tuesday for your packet, but primarily in 8th grade they start by visiting both Green Meadows and Wilbraham Middle School. They do a large group presentation, and then they also break the students up by the groups that they'll have when they come to high school. In 9th grade, is when students are first introduced to Naviance, which is our online school to career planning program. And they do that through the phys ed classes. They also have a career fair and the counselors are in the health classes co-teaching the Lifelines curriculum to our ninth graders. In 10th grade, there's a 4-day program of career readiness that they teach all phys ed classes in 10th grade. That career readiness program includes developing a resume, developing a cover letter, and doing a mock interview with business people from around the community, because 10th grade is really when they first start to go out for their first jobs. So we try to prepare them for what kinds of questions they might get in an interview at like a Big Y or a Mountain View or that kind of place. And then in 11th grade, they're using Allianz now in a more detailed way regarding college searches. Do I want to go to a city setting for college? Do I want to go to a rural setting? Do I want 50,000 students? Do I want 2,000 students? Those kinds of things. And then what do I want to study? Which of those colleges in those parameters have those programs? So they start working with the juniors there. They also have information nights for families, etc., around the college application process and getting ready to apply for college. In 12th grade, their lessons are focused on the next step. What is your career or college next step that you want to take, and how can we help you get there? They also do the Credit for Life financial planning guides, takes care of all of that, and they have multiple meetings with the seniors around the one application and getting themselves ready to apply to school if that's what kids are choosing to do. So let's just give you a 10,000-foot overview about the developmental guidance program.
Thank you.
Steve, there seemed to be yesterday quite a few students that were getting really large scholarships to really great schools. Does that fit into this? Are they encouraged or pushed in that regard, or are there people coming on campus and talking to you about your students?
Yeah, so the students who win those book awards and the scholarships that are associated with them, that list is given to the guidance counselors so that they can then sit down with the students and say, all right, let's check out Wells College. You may have never heard of it. Where is it? What is it? What are they known for? Let's talk about it. Mostly that pressure comes from the family. When you're given that size of an award, you need to go see that place. Because, and Superintendent Provost, we were talking about it during the ceremony, if we had a figure, because I know the figure in my head, 67,500 of what the Wilbraham-Hampton Scholarship Foundation gave out last night. I don't know the amount of scholarship. We were trying to keep track of it in our heads as the kids were getting awards, and I lost it.
Well, you were busy spending.
Yeah, well, it was a fun night. But we already made that change. We had our after action this morning about the awards night and said, I want a total for the underclassmen of the eligible scholarship money that they're winning, being awarded tonight, so I can say that in the introduction. Because it was north of 250, and then I lost track. So it was nice though.
Any other questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, thanks, Steve.
We'll continue with the capstone presentation follow-up.
Thank you very much. I would like to begin just by thanking the principals for that presentation. I'll also say that when you hear me speak tonight for the rest of the evening, you'll probably think that we rehearsed that, but we didn't. Because everything I'm about to say for my next several reports can fall into the bucket of MTSS, trying to disrupt racism and the other isms in the school, or trying to run school with inadequate funding, which are strong themes in their presentation, and will be what I'm talking about throughout the evening. So let's get into it with the capstone project. At our Last meeting, Christina Aguilar presented a capstone project describing disproportionality in student discipline practices in Western Massachusetts school districts. As you'll recall from my 2022 accountability presentation, which we were just talking about, disproportionality is also a concern for our district, where students who are Black or African American, Hispanic or Latino, multiracial, economically disadvantaged, or students who have disabilities were suspended at elevated rates last year. This resulted in the preliminary designation of both Wilbraham Middle School and Winchog Regional High School by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education for disproportionate rates of suspension for Hispanic and Latino students. And the high school was also preliminarily identified for disproportionate suspension of multiracial students. The district was invited to participate in the state's Rethinking Discipline Initiative as part of that, and I personally have attended several sessions. So I've been asked to follow on Christina's presentation by providing some more current information about disciplinary practices in our district. So there was a significant change to state law, which I think is important. I think it has helped us, pushed us to think a little bit differently. On this slide, you can see changes to Mass General Law that became effective November 8th this year, involving the section of the law known as Chapter 37H and 3/4, which is the part of the code that deals with what we call handbook offenses. Chapter 37H is the section that allows students to be removed for possession of a dangerous weapon or assaults on administrators and staff. And 37H1/2 is the section that allows students who are charged with felonies or felony delinquency to be removed. Those haven't changed. However, those are a small minority of any of the removals that occur in the district, thankfully. The vast majority fall under 37H and 3/4, which, as I said, are violations of the student handbook. So since November 8th, the state law has directed principals not to suspend or expel students without at least attempting or considering the appropriateness of other remedies such as mediation, conflict resolution, restorative justice, or collaborative problem solving. I believe our combination of our involvement in the state's Rethinking Discipline Initiative and the implementation of this law have been instrumental in the dramatic reductions we've seen in the use of suspension as a remedy for handbook violations. As of Monday, May 15th, we were 84% of the way through the school year. Now, the book is not closed on student discipline. There's a possibility that some more students will be suspended in the last few weeks of school. But we can tell that, without doubt, we're well below our historical averages for suspensions, both in school and out of school. And this is something to celebrate, because as Christina shared in her research on the school-to-prison pipeline, which begins with biased application of exclusionary disciplinary measures by school officials and ends with the biased application of incarceration in the criminal justice system, this is the beginning. So if we can change our practice, we can hopefully change outcomes for students. What I found most compelling in Christina's research were her interviews with the principals, in which they shared in their own words that they literally couldn't see the disproportionality that was happening in their own schools. These were schools where sometimes some groups said were being suspended at 150% or 200% of the rate of everyone else. But that's how implicit bias works. It prevents you from seeing what's in front of you. So, the good news is that our principals and associate principals have dramatically reduced the use of suspension with all student groups. We're on track to reduce our overall suspension rate by 50% in a single year. And that percentage reduction is even higher among some groups who have experienced disproportionately high suspension rates, including low-income students, students with disabilities, high-need students, and Hispanic or Latino students. This is what closing the valve on the school-to-prison pipeline looks like, and ought to be celebrated in a district that values inclusion. However, it's not all good news, as you heard tonight. It said that implicit bias is so pernicious because it blinds you to what's happening even when you're the one who's doing it. So one of the ways I attempt to interrupt what's happening in the district is bringing situations to light with facts and evidence. The fact is, as John explained earlier tonight, we're really struggling with discipline in the middle school years. We've had 21 students suspended in grade 8 alone, as compared to 24 students for the entire high school. And the things they've been suspended for fall inordinately in the realm of discriminatory harassment or sexual harassment. Or to say it more directly, identity-based antagonism. 18 of 19 substantiated cases of bullying at the middle school level have included a component of ethnic, racial, or sexual identity. At both the middle school and Green Meadow, students have been exposed to racial and ethnic epithets. At both schools, students have used the F slur. Our staff is working very hard to interrupt this behavior, but they need help. Lisa Curtin is looking for curriculum resources to raise awareness about the impact of these behaviors. But the truth is, this behavior doesn't only happen in schools, and so the intervention can't only be in schools. Sadly, a lot of students do hear these words for the first time in schools, and it's a very uncomfortable conversation when I'm talking to a parent about why he now has to explain what the N-word is to his child because he heard it in one of our schools. But as I said, for the most part, I don't think this is something that students are learning in school. So I'd like to take this opportunity to ask every parent, every coach, every grandparent, every religious leader, everyone who works with students aged 11 to 13 to help counteract this behavior when they see it. Because combating the harms that have happened to groups who've been historically marginalized in our schools requires more than just keeping them in school as opposed to suspending them. It also means combating the hate they sometimes encounter when they're in our schools. So that's where things stand with that, some good news and some bad news.
So I have a few questions on that. Can you go back to the prior slide, please? So I asked for a 5-year rolling average of the suspensions to understand what it looks like. So if we look at last year, let's say that's 180 students or so that were suspended. If I look at the 5-year rolling average, it was 32 students at Wilbraham Middle School and 8 at Minnesota Regional. So I would find it really hard to believe that we had another 140 suspended from elementary schools.
To just clarify the spreadsheet I sent you, I had to do it really quickly. The 5-year rolling average is the bottom line. So for last year, the 5-year rolling average would have been 35 for the middle school.
But I'm just looking at occurrences. So you get occurrences, and it's, you have 32, and you have 8.
You know what, there's one more year that's not showing. That was the COVID year.
The COVID year is showing it's 41 and 40, which would be 81 total suspensions.
What I'm saying is, I think what I was quickly trying to do this before the meeting, I mislabeled the years. Because there is another year here, it's 2022, which that is showing 2022. This spreadsheet that I was able to give you only goes up to 2021.
2022 shows 78 and 86. Is that not this year? I mean, if I look at this,
No, 2022 would be 2021, 2022, so that was last year, which is that number.
Okay. So I guess if we look at numbers, right, I would question, especially, and I hear what you're saying, at the middle school level, that's 11% of the 8th grade class that's been suspended, 7% of the 7th grade class, 5% of the 6th grade class. Let's contrast that with Minnesota, 2% 9, 5% 10, 2% 11, 1% 12, and we have very few suspensions in the elementary school level. So it would beg the question to me, and I hear that there are increased challenges there, but as we look at our systems, do we have the appropriate systems in place, and are we truly supporting rehabilitative justice as opposed to punitive justice? And it doesn't indicate, based on the data we're seeing, that we are.
I think when John gave his presentation, and I should say this red chart is both Green Meadows and middle school, those predominantly, obviously middle school data. They're looking at their social emotional curriculum in the middle school because wondering whether or not it's sufficient for the challenges they're facing. As you heard the principals say during their presentation, we're going to be doing 2 MTS evaluations. One of them is looking at the behavioral side of the triangle, and we'll get more data out of that about whether we have the right systems in place or enough systems in place to address what we're seeing.
Any other thoughts, questions?
Sorry, I gotta go back to it. So from 2019, let's use the last pre-COVID year. We've seen a 24.8% decline. Excuse me, 24.8%, 24.8 fewer students than spent at Minichog Regional High School for a 20% decline. At Wilbraham Middle School, we've seen a 37 student increase, which is trending with the amount of time we have left to be a 100% increase over the prior year.
Correct.
So I struggle with us sitting here saying, look at the great job that we're doing if we've seen a 100% increase in if we look pre-COVID to post-COVID. We've seen a decline in one age group, but we've seen a massive spike in another age group. So we can sit here and we can say, okay, but there are, if we look at it, all students, low-income students, students with disability, everything that Christina spoke to us about at the last meeting, those students now have a permanent mark on their record that we have given them. And I think we need to take a really hard look in the mirror at ourselves and make sure that we have a policy that truly supports all of our learners and does not disproportionately target certain population groups.
Totally agree. I think one of the things that I also want to bring to the table, and I think it's important to re-emphasize, is a lot of what we're seeing for suspensions at the middle school are suspensions that are related to some form of aggression, I'll say, against those very same student groups who were also targeted by disproportionate distance. So that's why I highlight that as a challenge for us and something that we need to get a handle on. That's why I asked the entire community for their support in that. That's why I went through the statistics on our bullying reports, which are almost all from 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. However, in spite of all that, I think it's still worthy of noting how much less suspension is happening this year than last year. And if you look at just the slide you're on right now, it's about half of what it looks like. In every group, it's less. There's no group that's trending up. What you have is a bubble at the middle school, and you have suspensions going down everywhere else. So when you put it in the aggregate, there's much less suspending now. One of the things I looked at was the total number of days of instruction lost due to suspension. It's a little bit hard to get because it kind of is given intervals rather than exact chunks. But we know last year that students lost at least 650 days of instruction due to suspension. And you can see where they were. They were all the groups that are highlighted in blue. This year, students are on track to lose less than 300 days of instruction, which is not great, but it's less than half of the lost instruction last year, and that's a tremendous benefit to those students. So I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm saying it's both. I'm saying we have made a tremendous amount of progress, and we still have to keep pushing on this.
Is there a difference in your data between in-school suspension and home suspension?
The data is broken down, but in this slide, that's also line. So whether it's in school or out of school, it would be reflected here.
So I think that would be interesting to see if there's an effect with, on the child has to go home for this.
I've had some conversations, John, with you offline about a lot of this, and this is purely anecdotal information because the sample was so small, but I was at friends were at my house, and we had their children from 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, and when we asked them, have you heard racial slurs at school, or if you say identity-based antagonisms, the 4th grader was like, not so much. The 5th graders were like, yes, a lot, and the 6th graders were like, yeah, it's through the roof. So, where we see where this happens, we want to look at the years before that. We want to look at 4th and 5th to see if there's something that we can do there before the students enter the middle school that can help us. So let them understand what they're saying. There's lots of jokes about identity-based antagonisms, microaggressions, things like that, when they learn early enough that, what you're actually saying is this, it opens their eyes and hopefully can steer the boat. But I know you and I have been having conversations and stuff about that, and this is very important, and it will be a focus going forward. Continue to be a focus going forward.
I just have one more question. John, do you feel the overcrowding at the middle school promotes some of these antagonisms and behaviors?
Let's use the mic, yeah.
Do I think overcrowding is a factor? I think everything's a factor when you've got 600 kids in the hallway at once. I think there's opportunities for that. I would venture to guess if the majority of us with older kids, when I would say kids are given cell phones is 5th and 6th grade. Sometimes earlier, and they are ill-equipped to know how to use them, and so we're giving them opportunities to connect, hear things, listen, without much responsibility tied to that. So I think that's a factor. I think there are a number of factors, but I think social media, I think the fact that my assistant principal, Jake, uses the analogy of you wouldn't drop your 11-year-old in the middle of the combat zone and say good luck, but you give them a phone with the same information they could find there, and we don't do anything to supervise them. So I think that's part of it. I wouldn't blame it on the facility. I think it's what kids hear, it's what they are exposed to consistently, without a lot of the responsibility that goes with it, because they don't see oftentimes what's happening on the weekends and at night on their phones spills into the building, and then we're picking up the pieces and we're having to, try and figure out what exactly is happening. That's a big piece of what's happening.
So, John,
We just need to talk up, we're trying to turn the span off, people that come on YouTube aren't having trouble with this, they have to.
okay. I apologize if it's really loud. To the two Johns, has any consideration been made to potentially implement the same cell phone policy that's at the high school, at the middle school level? And I think to some degree, I think people always opt out to forget that if you have an older sibling, you tend to learn things way sooner than you should.
Sure.
That I don't a lot of it comes, we learn most of our things from our environment, not just at school, but also at home too.
So our policy is a little bit different in terms of we don't allow at any point kids to use their phones. Now, do they? Sure. But I think it's a lot of what happens outside of our building electronically that then spills into the homes.
I just got a piece of information which kind of blew my mind, that 71% of 12-year-olds have cell phones, and 90% of 14-year-olds have cell phones. I had no idea it was that high.
And we don't. So maybe that's part of our responsibility is digital literacy piece and safe use of it, but that's got to be combined with families too.
But a lot of the families are saying, like, listen, here's a device I give you that's costing me $35 whatever, you know, an add-on to your system, right, or to your phone plan, and I know you have this phone, so I can reach you, you can reach me. There's security, there's safety in that, right? So I get why parents are doing it. It makes total complete sense, but again, we're dropping them off in the middle of the combat zone and saying, have at it. So there's yeah.
It is not the only reason. It is a contributing factor.
I think you're putting two combustibles together. It's not just the access to all the information, both good and bad, but again, we have to consider the age group developmentally. When you look at that 5 to 5th grade to 10th grade, especially in 6 to 8, I mean, these are kids developmentally who are going through a lot of changes. So, you know, all of that kind of spills in. So you've got this hormonal soup happening at the middle school, which, you know, is, you know, it's not on simmer, it's on boil, because now you add in all of these external factors, things that, you know, even when we were kids, you know, you just didn't have access to.
And I think that to Patrick's point, he's not wrong that we need to look at it differently. What are all the different areas that we can focus on to try and hit it? And part of that is, you know, communicating with families what we're seeing, and periodically done that and given opportunities for them to, you know, look at different programs that they can have, different apps they can use on the phone. Parents are busy too, but it's part of it. You're right.
Thank you for trying.
You can do better.
But I mean, somebody else besides, you know, I appreciate the fact that the educators in the room, the educators in the district are trying. Someday the students will realize that you guys were really trying to help them.
Yeah. So, right, Bill, to your point, right, and I guess there are a couple of doctors in here, the prefrontal cortex, what's development, like 25 years old. So it starts developing at adolescence. So here we are, and I guess my concern, my biggest fear, is we have kids that become a statistic because of the way that we are handling it. And so we have kids that frankly have the right, and it's part of growing up, they should make mistakes. They should learn from those mistakes, but their mistakes shouldn't trail them. And because of these and social media, I think a lot of these kids that we talk about mental health and some of the challenges out there, they feel like their mistakes follow them forever. So their worst day is a day they can never get beyond. And if we look at it, it's just statistics, and we seem to continue to add to those statistics, and we should let those prefrontal cortexes develop as they should without any concern for what that may do to someone's future.
And even looking at it longitudinally, I mean, if you look at cell phone utilization amongst 4th, 5th, 6th graders, I mean, you will see that over the last 5, 10, 15 years, you've seen an explosion in those devices in those age groups. So, you know, I really do. I feel badly for the students. I feel badly for the teachers and administrators, because it's an evolving problem. It's not something that, you know, there's sort of a definitive start point, end point. It's not like all of a sudden everybody got a cell phone. It's like every year you've got more and more of these kids at a younger age who have access to this information. And, you know, it requires a lot of supervision on the part of the parents to make sure that what those kids are using those cell phones for is appropriate.
Thank you. We will move on to the next topic of business, the capital stabilization.
Sorry.
Oh,
I just wanted to comment for Steve. The capstone discussions last week, I don't think we've ever had a student conversation that has led to a future meeting discussion point. And I know that's not in any of the academic goals, but my goodness, what they presented to us and some very impactful conversations. So as John was talking about the civics project, that is a great process course. Kudos to Georgina, kudos to those kids, because, right, you've seen it. We don't have many conversations that come from what someone shared at the prior meeting.
Going out on a high.
Is that the John Travolta walkout?
Yeah.
Thank you.
stabilization fund. Any comments?
No, so
Tabling it?
yeah, I'll just leave it out.
Yeah, that's info.
Set the stage. So at the last meeting, we were talking about the capital stabilization fund, and there's really, I think there's a wide range of opinions within this body, and I'm sure there's even a wider range of opinions outside of this body with regards to the Minnetonka Capital Stabilization Fund. What is its purpose, and do we need to have a policy that gives us at least some guardrails as far as what that stabilization fund can and should be used for? Patrick had opined at the last meeting that it was not something that he thought should have a policy. Thought it might tie the hands of future committees, and I had a little bit different take on it. I thought that it would be something that would be at least useful to provide some guidance as we prepare each year for budget season, to be able to look at that fund and identify things that would actually be considered capital items for the high school. So that's where we left it. It wasn't on the agenda, so it was put on the agenda tonight so that we could have a more frank discussion about it.
So I brought a little data with me this evening, and I apologize that I didn't have a chance to do it earlier for you folks to have in your folder. But I will tell you through the MASC policy manuals, and this goes for every single school that they have, I put the search term in stabilization fund, and it came back with 12 potential additional policies or policies that use those keywords. What I found interesting for one of them was Old Rochester, as part of their district agreement, specifically called out for times of payment for apportioned costs for the stabilization fund, the capital stabilization fund in itself, based on the establishment by a committee was one of the points, the maintenance of the capitalization fund, capital stabilization fund, limits on funding, expenditures for the capital stabilization fund. So I think there are ways in which we can potentially look at putting some sort of guideline in. And if, we've talked about the potential for changing the regional agreement, that would be a good opportunity where both towns, we can set the guidelines of how we want that to be, how we can get added. There is a mass general law for it. So it's something that I didn't know until I saw this. But then there are other districts that just use it for they tell you how they have it, how they use the funds for it, but they're mainly regional school districts similar to us. So it's not like it's an unfound thing, it does exist places.
I think we've talked about this in the past too, for people in the audience who may not be familiar with it. If you look at a true capital stabilization fund, I mean, we have a few $100,000 to cover a $63 million building. And so when you look at capital needs for Minnetonka, you realize very quickly that that fund is, if it was designed to provide funding for capital projects, it's woefully underfunded. How does it get funded? Every year we take money, set it aside in the school budget, which is out of the general budget, and then place that into the capital stabilization fund. I think typically each year we put about $50,000 away in that, but we've drawn out of that fund for several projects within the schools. So, you know, I think the three that Patrick, you had come up with was the railing, pool heater, and
Those are the only two I'm aware of.
I think there was one more you had.
No, those are the two.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of functioning like a true capital stabilization fund, I mean, it's not going to, it's never going to be able to cover the cost. I mean, if we looked at a simple project that would probably be the most, that would probably be the one closest on the horizon to us would be parking lot maintenance and resurfacing. I mean, you're looking at a, you know, $1 million plus project just to do that. Obviously, nowhere near the money that we have in that fund. And so, I know, Sean, why don't you, when we were talking about it, you would talk about one of the ways that you would look at using stabilization for like surveys.
Right. So can I have a, whoops. Want to wait now? So, so we had one specific meeting where we had lots of representatives from the town around the table. And I brought up this fund, and I said, okay, we have all the players around the table. What is this fund to be used for? And everyone was talking, and the consensus was, you know what, this fund should be that if something needs to happen at Minichog, let's say like a new roof, that the stabilization fund will fund the study, so that we can come back to the town and we can say it's going to cost this much. You know, we've received these quotes and stuff like that, and then let the towns come up with the money. The next meeting where we had the same representative group around the table, which was just a few weeks later, talking about the budget, they all said, no, that's money that you should use right now. You can use it for the stairs, you can use it for the switches, you can use it for, it was the direct opposite of what we were told a couple meetings before was the consensus. The consensus changed. So in order for this to be a true capital fund, we should have, I don't know, conservatively 10%, 5% of whatever the building costs inside that fund. And we don't. We have 1%, maybe, if we're lucky? Less than 1%? Not even?
Less than 1%.
Less than 1%. So, okay, its name is a stabilization fund, but it's not a stabilization fund because it's not funded like that. And I don't think the towns want to put money, to give money to the schools that is just going to sit into this account for stuff that we're going to need down the line. When we are in the economy that we're in right now, where every cent, you know, talking about rainy day funds, this is the rainy day. This year, next year is going to be even worse. So I think that the money that we have there, I think we should use them for both. You know, whatever the towns decide, because at the end of the day, it's taxpayer money. It's taxpayer money that we have been entrusted with to educate our children. And if this money is sitting in a fund, you don't want it to be too big because that would be irresponsible because the money's not doing something at the time, and we don't want it to be too small that it can't do anything. So for 10 years we haven't had we haven't put goalposts around that money, and there hasn't been abuse of that. I think that with the 7 members on this committee and talking with the towns, whatever the need is, we can use that money for. I think it's, like Patrick said, it's good to keep it really broad.
So just so you know, Patrick, Sean, the stabilization, the Mass General Law requires a certain percentage of what you can actually keep in that account. So I know we keep talking about how there should be millions of dollars in that account. According to the Mass General Law, it basically says that funds in amount not exceeding 5% of the aggregate amount apportioned to the member municipalities for the preceding fiscal year or such larger amount as may be approved by the Commissioner of Elementary and Secondary Education. So I'd be interested to find out what amount that they would say, the Department of Education would say.
That's 5% a year, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so 5% of the money that we get from the towns, which is...
No.
Well, no, 50 million is our whole budget, but it's like 30 million?
But it's capped at it, so it's,
right.
It's not going to grow. If
can't put 5% a year.
Oh, I thought that's what she said, annually.
It's the total, total value
Not
of the
exceed
account.
5%.
Oh, yeah, but so that's a capitalization, that's a stabilization, whatever that is for, but it's not a true capitalization fund, because a capitalization fund would have to be more. We can't do, with the money that we have in there right now, we can't repave the driveways, we can't put on a new roof, we can't change any windows, we can't, retile floors, we can't paint buildings, I mean,
So, I think, Bill, when I was recommending it, I'll tell you, I don't think anything that we've used it for would fit my definition of truly a capital need that should be paid for by a stabilization fund. And I think that when we look, potentially the beauty of not having a definition is that it provides that flexibility for future committees in future years. So if we think about some of the biggest challenges that we have as a district, it is because of guardrails that were put in place at a prior period where no one imagined what the future would look like. And I'm sure we have a few people that are going to make a comment or two tonight about some of the limitations that we have because of guardrails that were put in place. And so I would look to future committees and future administrators to be great stewards of the stabilization fund, but not put the handcuffs on them such that it gets to a point where something can't occur as a result of that. The other piece I would share that I think is more concerning to me is that we have no defined process with Hamden or Wilbraham for true capital needs at Minnetonka Regional. So if we think about every other school that we have, there's a set dollar amount. We're responsible for anything up to it, and then they own it. If we think about it at Minnetonka, in theory, Hamden Wilbraham Regional School District, responsible for the parking lot. That's going to need to be done here within, I guess, the next 5 years. Responsible for the roof, responsible for the chillers, responsible for the air handlers, you name it, we're responsible for all of it. So I would encourage the future energy not be on defining what the stabilization fund can and can't be spent on, but rather on what does that look like for a process of looking at capital needs for Minnetonka, such that the towns are accurately and adequately funding those.
Here, here.
So just to give some historical perspective on this, again, for people who may not be aware, so the Capital Stabilization Fund was set up when the new Minnetonka was built. And I'm paraphrasing Mr. Boyd here, but Doug always gives a very nice synopsis of it when he says, it was a promise made to the taxpayers that we would never let Minnetonka fall into the disrepair that it did before it was ultimately torn down. And so whether that fund is simply symbolic in nature, or whether it does have some functional utility, I think would vary, again, between the members here. I guess the fear that I would have is that I don't like seeing, hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting on the shelf not being utilized. However, I also don't want to lose the trust of the people that pay the taxes to keep all of these buildings open and running, in that we're not at least making an effort to say the capital needs of this building are things that we need to keep front and center every single year as we develop the budget. And as we said, it's unique to everybody on this committee, because I've been on the committee the longest, but we've never had any capital needs for Minnetonka, right? And the building was what, 6 years old when I got on the committee. So now it's 15 years old. So now things are starting to show their age. Dare I say, before the new Minnetonka was built, there was probably no capital projects that were initiated in that building for maybe 5 to 7 years, maybe even 10. So this is kind of new ground. Patrick is absolutely right. There really isn't a defined process with regards to how capital projects are to be not just funded, but also identified. And I think that's going to be the work of this committee moving forward, especially through the finance and operation, is to be able to say, where are we going? And the idea behind what I thought would be guardrails on it, and it's not a hill I'm going to die on, but I just want to make sure that, you know, we're not just pilfering money away from it, draining the account for projects that maybe could be utilized in better fashion. So, but I'm fine with not having it be one less thing, so.
And there's still hope that I'll win the lottery.
All right, anything else? Okay, thank you. We are going to move on to public comment.
So there's a microphone. There's a, yeah, right up here, there's a microphone.
Where's
Does
your
anybody
shot
have
clock?
public comment?
Oh, okay. Sean, what's your clock?
Of course I didn't bring it today, I rushed out. But though I,
So
I'll
we
time
will
in.
call on those that have signed up for public comment. We do ask that when called, each person state their name and address, sit at the designated location, please make sure your microphone is on, and you can speak for up to 2 minutes. So thank you.
So, okay, my name is Kelly McDonald. My address is 27 Zipporah Drive in Oakland. I guess my question is, I have a comment on like the start time of my train busing. You guys haven't brought that up. I was told it was going to be brought up at the meeting, and I speak about that now.
Speak about whatever you want.
Okay.
You have 2 minutes.
I guess my main question is the start time. So what my understanding is, and I've gotten bits and pieces from a lot of places, and there's no real concrete evidence except for when I emailed Mr. Provost today and a couple of school committee members about what the start time is for Mile Tree for next year. I'm hearing that start time for Mile Tree will be like 9 o'clock for our youngest learners. So my question is, why are our youngest learners, who are the earliest risers, having the latest start times? So that's number one. Number two is a concern is working families and parents. I'm a working parent. My husband's a working parent. We have to go to our job. My job doesn't care that Wilbraham State changed the start time this year to 9 o'clock instead of 8:30 as it was. So with having 2 before school and after school programs in the whole Wilbraham area, which have wait lists as far as I know, how are we going to help working parents get their children to school? I mean, a 9 o'clock start time, my kindergartner, I can't leave her home to get on the bus by herself. What?
1 minute.
Oh, I'm sorry, thank you. My other question, hold on, I wrote some sorry. I guess my other question is, are there any other things that we can look at to solve this problem instead of just going to the later start time and later buses? Like, I know in my neighborhood, I'm in Decorey, we have over 20 bus stops, and I'm just counting the people I know. They stop at every individual house. Can we do something as, you know, maybe a bus stop or something to try and figure out the bus issue instead of just saying, nope, we're doing 9 o'clock start time, parents, you gotta figure it out and have fun. And also it's May, like, school starts in August. We have, what, 4 months to figure this out, 3 months? So I guess that's my main concern. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Ashley Davis, are you here?
No, she's not here.
Okay. Is there anyone else that would like to make a comment that did not sign up to do so?
I've never done this. Heather Fontaine, 3155 Boston Road, Wilbraham. I'm basically going to echo what she said because I think it's very important that, I don't know if the decision's already been made or if this is still in the works. My biggest question is, why not start elementary at 7:45 in the morning and start the high school at 9 o'clock? They can get on the bus themselves. They can drive themselves to school. We have to now carry the burden of before school care when you could easily have the high schoolers start later. They can get themselves to school. I really don't understand it. The burden you're putting on all of these working families is just, she mentioned wait lists. It's also the price of it. I mean, it's just, these kids wake up so early. You have these studies done saying high schoolers would rather go in later. These younger kids should be in earlier. Why not make the high school 9 o'clock? That's it. I guess I don't know. If you're gonna talk about it today, do you guys answer questions or do I just talk?
You just talk.
Okay, just talk. All right. Well, that's it.
But thank you for
There
your
will be an
comment.
update this, in the superintendent's report. We will be updating, we'll be talking about this topic, so.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to make a public comment if they not signed up to do so, that would like to?
I'll do it as well.
Excellent.
We sent something in, but I'll say it anyways. Brian Lenahan, 2 Bittersweet Lane, Wilbraham. Echoing a lot of the comments that were already made, I think the biggest concern for us is there really hasn't been any transparency about the entire process. There's been no involvement, it seems like, from the community, no information provided to us. It seemed like the town meeting was supposed to provide some sort of update in terms of, it was either seemed like one option to eliminate Paris in kindergarten, or the other option was changing start times and bus rates. We just want transparency. At the end of the day, all we're looking for is to be able to have the information so we can go ahead and make informed decisions for ourselves and our families. And I think at this point in time, to echo a lot of what was already said, is the decision seems to have been already made, especially based on the email that was received from us earlier today from Dr. Provost. And realistically, I mean, I think it's putting all of us in both towns at a huge disadvantage, because it's not just Mile Trade, Green Meadows as well. So I think a lot of us are just put in really difficult positions. And realistically, all we're looking for is to get any sort of transparency from the district, from the school committee, from the finance, anything, to be able to then go ahead and make sure that we have the information, we can provide information to you, provide whatever data you need to be able to go ahead and make the decisions you need to make. We understand that obviously there's budgetary restrictions and all of that. I think the $200,000 savings that apparently this plan is supposed to put into effect, it'd be great to see what that looks like, you know, how we determine that's the case. In my particular example, I have an 8-year-old that's going to go to 2nd grade. He's picked up beforehand, and somehow it's saving money to then come back around again and pick up our 2 little ones that are going to go to kindergarten. It just doesn't make sense as far as how that's actually saving money. So it's kind of everything I have to say. Just transparency would be extremely important at this point in time to be able to go ahead and, at least as us as a community, be able to go ahead and make whatever decision you need to make.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to make a public comment that is not able to sign up to do so? Are you reading from somebody,
No.
or are you speaking?
I'm speaking for, hi, my name is Sean Kennedy, 3 Blueberry Hill Road in Wilbraham, Massachusetts. When we first started talking about a 3rd-tier system for the school buses, I was under the impression that elementary wouldn't be touched, that this would be something that would affect the middle school and the high school. Because we've all read those reports that came out that said starting later is better for middle schoolers and for high schoolers. So when I had heard this, it hasn't been talked about, it hasn't been discussed. This is something that really does need to be drilled into. And if we do something that we have to expand our thinking. If we're going to do this, we have to offer choices for the parents to help them deal with this. There are times when I am working and my wife is working. We are blessed that my mother-in-law lives with us, and you know, we have neighbors if that's not the case. So we are very lucky where we live, but not a lot of other parents are as lucky. And so we really need to talk about this. We really need to dig into this. And as a parent, I'm very concerned about this. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to make a public comment that is not able to sign up? Thank you.
Evening, I'm Sarah Wright, 21 Brookside Circle. I want to start my comment by saying thank you, Dr. Provost, for trying to accomplish this mission of saving money, because if you hadn't, we were undergoing some major cuts that were going to be detrimental to our elementary schools. So I appreciate that effort, and I just want to speak from a parent perspective, like the rest of them, and also an educator perspective with our young students being in school, and with in mind our MTSS model, and just logistically what that might look like in our day. And our core content normally gets pushed at the beginning of the day, and then we'd be intervening with our students later in the day, and that would fall towards maybe when our youngest students are definitely tiring out. So I just wanted to share that perspective of of our young students when they're at their best, and also our neediest students with looking at diversity and equity and kids who who have parents going to work, getting to school on time without parents, students that are special needs and require special transportation, what their parents will do for them before their special transportation comes. So I just, I wanted to bring a whole perspective and thinking about how that's impacting all of us greatly. So thanks for your effort. Thanks for considering.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to make a public comment that was not able to do so? Oh, okay, so you wanted to, sorry. No. Okay, all right, well, thank you very much, everyone, for your public comment. Do you want to speak to that now?
Sure, I could give that piece of my report so that everyone doesn't have to wait around for the consent agenda and everything else.
Thank you, appreciate it.
So, let me begin by addressing the changing times at Green Meadows and Mile Tree that were part of the budget process. This is mainly for those who are coming into conversation at this point, those of you who have spoken in public comment tonight. So you can have some background information about how we got to this difficult place. Our budget process started in November with an approximately $2 million gap between the amount the schools needed to implement a not even level service budget, but less than level service budget, an amount that towns felt was affordable. So we worked diligently to close the gap, but it was still about $1 million as of mid-March. Adding a third transportation tier, which is projected to reduce transportation costs by about $200,000 as recommended, is a way to help bridge the gap. That still left $800,000 between what the schools needed and our projected funding. Just to explain how that happened, because adding a third tier allows us to eliminate 5 buses. Costs essentially $40,000 a bus for a year. When you run a third tier, you're reusing some of the buses. So you can reduce the amount of buses that you use in the district. Just another piece of information I've learned through this whole process. We're driving about 300 miles a day just on bus routes in the district. And so what would happen is some of the buses would run longer. They take not just 2 schools as they currently do, but 3 schools. So that's that piece. In anticipation of the funding shortfall, we began the process of implementing cuts that would have been truly devastating, as Sarah said. Among other measures, the district issued 15 staff pink slips and it planned to cancel all 9th grade sports. While the staff reductions were shared across the district, it wasn't just at Mile Tree and Green Meadows. Many of those cuts would have come from Mile Tree and Green Meadows because many of them were paraprofessionals, general ed paraprofessionals, which are only at Green Meadows and Mile Tree. This led to further negotiations with the town. Ultimately, a compromise was reached in which the towns agreed to appropriate about an additional $350,000, and the district agreed to draw down reserves by about $200,000. This, along with some increased money we were looking at from the state version of the budget, for the House version of the state budget, about $150,000 increase over the governor's version of the budget would close the gap. However, this still required $200,000 saving from implementing a third tier. The budgets were approved by him and Wilbraham based on this compromise. And this morning, the bus company provided me a schedule with the 3-tier model and the projected times. While this was all happening at the local level, which is where the vast majority of our funding comes from, there were things happening at the state and federal level that were not so promising. As I mentioned, the House version of the budget, which is the second version of the budget that comes out, added about $150,000 to the district. The Senate version, which is the third version that comes out, took back $134,000 of that $150,000. So now we're looking at approximately a $16,000 deficit no matter what. I'm sorry, we're looking at $134,000 deficit no matter what. Also, as you know, there's a lot of haggling going on at the federal level right now. President and House Republicans are starting to talk to each other, but the plan is, as I understand it, that there will be an agreement in the House of Representatives to lift the federal budget deficit cap in exchange for making cuts to federal programs. One of those cuts is federal special education support for districts. So that's another deficit we're potentially looking at. Another is reductions in federal support for Title I. That's funding for districts for low-income students, both of which we received. I mean, the only good news I can say about that is the federal government doesn't give us so much money, so they can't take so much money from us, but it's still deficits that are potentially in the offing. So I realize that any change to the school schedule has an impact on families. You mentioned flipping the tiers and starting elementary earlier and high school later, which is something I did in my last district. That was great in a lot of ways, but it was harmful in a lot of ways. It also had some negative impacts on families. So any change to the status quo upsets the apple cart of what people have built their lives around, really. I have been in communication with the YMCA because I have heard about wait list concern. They've told me that if this change causes an increased demand for their before and after school care, they're ready to meet the demand by staffing up. Let me add that this morning I also received a plan from the bus company that would save some money, but not the full amount, without impacting the schedules. As I said, it's about $40,000 per bus. We're planning on saving 5 buses for $200,000. They could do a model, they shared with me, with 4 fewer buses. That would save $60,000. That would still leave us with, it would create another $40,000 gap that we put on top of the $134,000 gap we're at right now. So I guess what I'd say is, I don't know if there is an appetite among the school committee for considering that model instead. If there is, I think my thought about this is it's really concerning to me that we'd be doing it at a time when we know we're probably opening up $174,000 hole for the first day of the fiscal year. I have heard from my sources in the Senate that the Senate is possibly thinking about passing a supplemental budget. One of the things that the superintendents have been really advocating for is holding districts harmless to what you might have heard is the 14% increase they approved for OSD. Just to share with you what that means is OSD is the state agency that regulates the tuition that we pay to private schools for some students who require special education services. The state recognized that due to inflationary pressures, they needed a minimum 14% increase in order to remain functional. That's paid by us. That is about $350,000. So if that supplemental budget came through, that would be another potential bucket of money we could go to address some of the gaps. But again, I haven't actually seen that supplemental from the Senate. I don't know if it's going to be supported by the House. So there's just a lot of things up in the air. So that is a summary of how we got to this place. I have been thinking a lot about your comment about transparency because, one of the things that's always challenging for me is, as a public employee, I have to be careful about using public resources to sway the local political process. And sometimes anything I say that's related to the budget is seen as some kind of a political move to put pressure on one group or another group to create an outcome. But one thing I was thinking that maybe we should do is start emailing parents every single tape of all the meetings starting in November, so that, we're not in a position of catching some folks off guard. So, I don't, those are just my thoughts. They're not really solutions. There is the potential, that you could go with the four bus savings model that would change start times, but I don't know how to do it.
Sorry, not to pile more bad news on top of bad news, but I think everybody on the committee is also aware that state revenues for this quarter were down $1.435 billion, which also adds to a lot of the angst at the state level. And the other thing that you didn't touch upon, but it's something that has impacted our district this year, has been the lack of bus drivers. And, the LPVEC was constantly advertising. I heard ads today on the radio for it. It's impacted bus routes with the buses that we have now. So, I mean, it's a scary proposition, but at the same time, if you eliminate 4 buses or 5 buses, that's 5 less drivers that you need to be concerned about in hiring. I know that we've had several vacancies on routes, and it's impacted pickups for kids for periods of time. So, not to shovel more bad news on top of the stuff we already gave us, but I think it provides an even clearer picture of what we were facing. At the finance and operations subcommittee level, we've been having these discussions for a while, and you hate to say it, but I mean you can save $200,000 in a budget, especially with the gap that we were facing. It's a significant amount. I wish we didn't have to do anything with the bus routes. I wish we could keep them the way that we are. But it's something we need to look at. I'd be interested to see the schedule that they have for the 4, because I didn't see it.
Well, with the 4, would be no change.
So you're saying that we're going to save $160,000 with no change, or $200,000 with this change?
Correct.
All right. That is something that needs to be considered. But putting that aside for a second, if we think outside the box here just a little bit, like, is there anything that we can do about early drop-off at school? Is there something that we can do with maybe, getting some high school students that get the proper training to watch children for a certain period of time in the morning, something like that? Huh?
They're already in school.
They're already in school. I know, I'm just, like I said, I'm thinking outside the box, maybe they come in later. I don't know. There's got to be something that we can do to help these parents, regardless if we go with the 4, the 4 buses or the 5 buses, that, we have that problem. There are other solutions other than just saying, all right, you have the money to shovel out for the YMCA. I don't know if people have that funds. I'm not sure I would. So I'm just saying that there really should be, when we do a change like this, we should always think of, all right, what can we do to mitigate the problem? We have these people calling in and saying, okay, have those people who emailed us, have the people who spoke here today come down, have a focus group. Hey, listen, what if we kept it this way, what could we do to make things better? What help could we give you? What options would be out there to lessen the impact?
So one idea that was proposed today, actually by Mr. Hale, was Mile Tree Extension is not being used currently. It could become a drop-off center. You could probably offer it at a very competitive rate compared to the Y.
What would be the capacity of that?
I would think probably about 24.
How many kids start early that are going to be impacted by the early start? Were you looking for forward?
Not sure. I mean, obviously, more students would be starting later than I'm sure how many is one before school starts.
So did it get modeled out, or was consideration given to if we had changed to the senior, like the high school starting later versus the elementary level? Did it get modeled out?
No, that was not ever part of our discussions.
And then I just have a quick question for Bill and Sean.
Follow up on a why?
Because we had never discussed that as a committee, or you had never discussed that as a committee. That is a very significant change that impacts a lot of things and requires a lot of discussion.
I was under the impression from the beginning that the middle schools wouldn't be affected. It would be, the elementary schools wouldn't be affected. This would be a middle and high school.
I didn't know which was gonna be impacted. I was waiting to get information on the three-tier plan because it was just a three-tier plan. It never actually said which were impacted.
Well, at the budget roundtables, we presented 3 potential models. One is this one that turned out to be the one that actually worked when they put it into Hwrsd hands. One would essentially move the change to other elementary schools in Wilbraham, and then one basically just adjusted everything slightly, but didn't work out when we put it into Hwrsd.
I just remember being mentioned as tiers, not which schools, but I just had a question for the senior members of our school committee.
We'll watch it down there.
Is there a reason why if we needed to for busing, we couldn't charge for busing?
Yes.
Yes, the law doesn't allow, but that was actually gonna be my question.
Because Munson does it.
So
Munson's not regional.
No, I realize that part.
So from a regional standpoint, I guess that was part of where I was going. So for those that are unaware, we have to provide transportation for every student in the district, regardless of where they reside. We are only reimbursed for students that reside 1.5 miles or greater on a commonly traveled route. When you read the law, there are no punishments. So what ramification would there be if we chose to have families opt out of transportation and we supported our buses with only those that have opted into transportation, if there are no punishments written in the law for those that do not follow or fully comply with the Regional Transportation Act, the state is not fully funding despite prior commitments to fully fund.
So,
Did you know the answer?
yeah, so the hairy part of that is he who controls the purse strings controls the controls of what goes on.
But we can carry forward for a year, correct?
You'd be able to carry forward for a year, but what if the state turned around and said your Chapter 71 funding is now gone because you did not comply with the law as it is written?
But there is nothing that, as I read the law, that allows them to do that.
So, John, do you have conversations with the commissioner at all? Do you guys still have meetings with him? Because I have to imagine we're not the only district having a problem getting bus drivers.
We're not, by any means.
Has any consideration been made to reach out to the National Guard to see if they can provide some subsidiary assistance or support in the driving aspect?
The National Guard, as you may recall, was activated early in COVID to provide bus driving services. That was shut down pretty quickly because it's really pretty far out of the scope of their mission, they felt. I think that, you know, I don't see a state solution for the bus driver shortage, but this is really not about the bus driver shortage. This is really about the financial straits that we're in. I don't know the answer to your question, but I will say that most of the enforcement mechanisms are financial. If it's something that the committee wants me to run by Sean, I could ask him what he thinks. Would there be any liability for the district if we did an opt-out plan?
Well, and the hard part too about the opt-out plan is that I don't know how many people you would actually get to do that, only because you do have families that will transport their children the majority of time. However, that bus is sort of the backup. Right. You know, oh, you know what? Oh, shoot, we're both going to be working late this day, and you know, well, we can have them take the bus, and you know, Grammy will be there to get them off the bus. So I don't know if we get a big bite on that on doing an opt-out.
But then there's that pickup drop-off, so if someone opts in for delivered, like, you know, return from home to go home, but opts out in morning pickup. You know, because some people it's easier for them to drop their child off on their way to work. And so then they drop them off at school, but then they can take the bus home and there's someone there to meet them at home, whether it's an older sibling or a parent or guardian or neighbor that late.
That's probably a capacity and administrative nightmare if you were to have people opt in
I
for
understand.
one or opt out for the other. I guess the other question to, I believe was Kelly's point, and I know I've shared this before, so running this morning in the neighborhood that I was in, there were 4 bus stops in less than a 1/10 of a mile distance. So when we look at the plan that the LPDC has provided, has it streamlined the number of stops such that they are stopping in a neighborhood in compliance with the law minimally versus the maximum times that they're stopping today?
I just received it this morning, and I don't know the answer to that, but I can have them, they have said that they may be able to adjust it, because they have to actually see how it's gonna work out. Maybe we could do an experiment where we cut down the number of bus stops and see if they can make that time a little bit closer to what it is now.
I was under the impression that there is a law that states that elementary level must have sidewalks.
Sidewalks. Yeah,
So,
that's what I was gonna say
There's
too.
a lot of sidewalks being done on Stony Hill Road, and that's getting pretty well in place, but any side streets are just, there aren't any sidewalks.
This was a middle school bus.
What?
This was a middle school bus.
But that's,
So I
that's the
think
only way
there's
not
a-
impacted by this. No.
There is a challenge with the philosophy when it comes to busing, and that is that we have made accommodations to stop at effectively every driveway. And we need to understand what the savings would be to eliminate that and move to a common bus stop where achievable.
Especially where you're talking about reducing the number of buses required, because again, I mean, I know I brought it up at one of the roundtables that, you know, those that are transferring from Hamden to Wilbraham, busing was never promised, it is not part of that agreement. And I know that some of those routes had been absorbed, but that could be adding to the expense. We've never, no one has ever looked into that, said how many more stops have now been added.
You know, that's an
So-
excellent point. When I came to the district, I was told that it was done because it really didn't change anything, in terms of the buses. I could ask them if we stopped all transportation for students who had transferred into Wilbraham, if they could free up a bus that way.
I'm just modeling it, no one's saying that anything's gonna change, but at this point, we have to look at all options.
The other thing, I just want to make this clear, so sidewalks are an issue, going 3 or 4 houses down on a day like today, that's not a problem. The grass is green, the sun is out, everything is wonderful. But when there's, a couple feet of snow on the ground and they're having to walk on a slushy road with cars going by and stuff, it really becomes an issue. So I know at the elementary level, they do, most stops in front of houses, or some houses, across the street or whatever, they congregate, but yeah, it's something to be really careful. We gotta think of everything, so.
My last ask, is it possible to reach out to the PVTA to see if maybe we need to consider putting some public transportation stops within both towns, and maybe they need to start to include the towns on a route or a couple routes, and maybe they can help offset some of that?
I can answer that question, because my last district, I had several bus stops all over the city, and could easily have made a lot of kids get to school on time if I could just move a couple of bus stops, a few walks. There's actually a law in the public transportation regulations that say you can't move PVTA, MVTA, any of those kinds of buses specifically for school transportation. You can use them for school transportation, but they have to follow their established routes because they're really there for non-student riders.
I don't know that we really ever considered having routes in town that would help, but I would say that this would be a good opportunity for us to reach out to the communities, select boards and planning boards, to see that maybe there's a need for that. We have a lot of seniors in both communities, and at some point, there's gonna be that need for people to get to the senior centers too. So depending on where you put the stops, that could help. Maybe not do it specifically for school, but help.
I have to say that, of all the ideas I've heard, I think I need to know whether this is the direction I'm getting from the committee. The one that seems like it might hold the most promise is stopping transportation for transfer students. Because if we have 4 sort of already baked into the tie with what they've shown me in the other model, if we could get 1 more bus free by stopping transportation, that would probably get to the 5th bus we need for $200,000. But also probably have another meeting with a lot of people at it. But I mean, it was not part of the agreement as far as I understand.
That's fair.
It was not. I get an idea.
So is it possible for you to, once you get this information, I think it's important, this is, part of one of the things that came up with the strategic plan was that we make sure that we have communication with the community, that we look to possibly have 2 forums, 1 in each community, possibly on a weekend. I realize it's going to be a scheduling nightmare, but allowing for something that would be during the week and potentially maybe on a Saturday afternoon, and if it's not something that the district can hold, but if you can provide the information, we could try to utilize respective communities to try to get the word out and allow there to be some forums where people can provide feedback and be made aware.
Yeah, I got an idea. So we have to give every child a seat on the bus, right? And we cannot collect fees for buses, right? So Patrick's idea of like, well, what if we ignored it? What's the penalty? Is there some way that we could have listen, if we just did a $20 student fee, then we're over the 40,000, and then we can go with the 4 buses. And that's just $20 per child in the district, right? That's doable. I'm getting thumbs up over here that that's doable. I don't know what we call it. I don't know whatever, but I'd accept a rap on the knuckles from Sister Mary Desi, rather than.
So we have, I will say that we have, the problem is that money has to go somewhere, right? So you collect that money.
Right.
And that money would have to go into your transportation bucket. And when you get audited every year, when Melanson comes by and they do the audits of the books, they're gonna look and they're gonna be like, so where did this $40,000 come from? And you're gonna be like,
what about strategic?
Sean Kennedy won the megabucks.
Yeah. If I win the lottery, it'll fix everything. But well, what if we did something like giving it to the stabilization fund? Have everyone donate money to the stabilization fund, and then that covers the money, and
again.
I mean, come on.
My only concern was that, now that this has been discussed in the public meetings, if it were to happen, it would look like we were charging a fee for transportation, which you're not allowed to do.
I will say that, we have implored our legislators at many different times to look at the Chapter 71 verbiage and to provide some relief for regional school districts. I'm going to be honest with you, for all of the folks that were here tonight and spoke, you've got your state representative is Angela Pupolo, and your state senator is Jake Oliveira. And those are great places where, you've got Sherry at, at Angela's office. And your voices mean an awful lot. And it's even more than what we say, because you guys are the folks that are being impacted by this. And as I look at, I didn't know about the second model that they presented, and I like the idea of trying to put together bus stops to try to decrease the total amount of transit time. I would definitely be in favor of losing 4 buses and trying to find 40,000 than losing 5 buses, because my kids aren't that old, and I do remember, when my kids were 2nd, 3rd grade, yeah, by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they're out of steam, right? They've had it, and whether or not they end school at 2 or at 3:30, that's a huge difference. Putting an extra hour and a half on those kids' days, because as all these folks can attest to, and every one of us at this table who has children can attest to, kids get up when they get up, and it's early.
But I can make a donation to the school. No, I can donate $100 to the school and say I want it to be put towards busing, correct?
Yes.
All right, I'm gonna bring in $100 check next and put it towards the, to the busing. I am doing that solely. I am not recommending anyone else to do that because that wouldn't be ethical or whatever.
Well, but just remember, you have to accept every single one of those.
No, only over $500.
Welcome on.
So John, I do have a question. Reading section 68 of the law, I don't see anywhere, and I've always operated, Cheryl, under that assumption that K through 6 requires a sidewalk. The law does not say that under section 68. All that it references would be a children in grades kindergarten through 6, effectively if the school is more than 2 miles and they are more than 1 mile from the bus stop. That's where it talks. Nowhere in the law does it say anything about the sidewalks. So where is that coming from? And do we need to look at that differently if that is not in the law as it is written?
So I've always heard it interpreted as safe routes to school. I can't say that I'm an expert on this part of the code, but I do know that I've moved a lot of bus stops in my time because of it's not having sidewalks or a safe place to stand or to get to the bus stop. So I think it's at least a commonly understood thing if it's not an actual law.
What about an incentive?
Look at sections, chapter 68.
What about an incentive to the high schoolers every time they park, their parking fee goes down?
Doesn't matter, you still have to have a C form. If the car breaks down or they get their license suspended, then they're back on the bus again.
It's one of the traps of chapter 71 is, you know, and unfortunately, again, for the folks that are here, when this school district was voted on in 1993 and it regionalized K through 12, the promise from the state is that regional transportation would be funded at 100%. And so we wouldn't have to be having these discussions that we're having right now. I know Pete Dufresne, he and I had a discussion about it, and this goes back probably 5 years ago, but even at that time, if you looked at the total amount of money that the state had underfunded regional transportation in our district, it was over $8 million. And so even when they promised to fund it 90%, they're still 10% short of what they promised they were going to. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of school districts that are looking at regionalization end up turning their nose to it because they realize that, you know, the promise from the state that they're going to get 100% reimbursement isn't going to pan out. And that's a problem at the legislative level. And if you look at the you know, cuts that take place within the state, when you look at the discretionary 9C cuts, regional transportation is always one of the first things that gets chopped. So, that's unfortunate, but I think it's something that definitely needs some more research, and I would really work on LPVEC to be even more creative and talk to them about both the impacts of transfer students, but more importantly is the impacts of, could there be centralized bus stops if that's something that parents can actually work out to get a safe place for kids to wait for the bus. And again, you have neighborhoods, right? So all of these kids are friends, all of the parents know each other. So, maybe that's something that they could work out. I don't know how much it would impact, only because you're looking at basically the time of onloading. Is it significant? I don't know. I don't drive the bus. Like Patrick, I see the buses go by and they're, it's like every house is a stop, every house is a stop. How much would that impact? They may have to just do a trial run to see.
John, so reading the law closer.
Public ways, see private ways.
I did see private way, which is interesting,
We
but
should
are
ask
we
them
not
about
receiving
private
any reimbursement for any of the transportation to the discoveries from Mile Trade? Or because of the way our buses run, do we receive funding? Because anything that's less than 1.5 miles, we don't receive funding for. Discoveries to Mile Trade is less than 1.5 miles.
I don't know the answer. I'll have to look into that.
Thanks.
I think that came up a couple of years ago.
What came up whether
If they were
it
using
should
our buses to bring the
continue or
kids.
not. That's what the discussion was, because I think it was the other childcare facility, I think it was on Stony Hill, had requested that, and the conversation, if I recall, was that an agreement was made. It's allowed under the law. However, if you read it, Mile Tree to Discoveries, in theory, we're not receiving reimbursement from the state for, and that's a pretty full bus that goes there.
Thank you.
Thank you for all you guys that came tonight.
We are going to continue with subcommittee updates, curriculum subcommittee.
We will meet on the 22nd at 5 p.m. in the IRC to go over the program of studies for East Meadows Middle School and the Wilbraham Middle School.
Thank you. Planning committee update. We met on Tuesday, May 16th. We just did a recap of the meeting that we had with the Boards of Select and the advisory and FinCom from both towns. And we discussed about how our next meeting would be with parent organization groups, PTO, school councils, and that we would also, most likely in the fall, be speaking with other parents, stakeholders, community members, and the way that we would disseminate information, making sure that it would be able to be obtained by everybody, making sure that whether it was robocalls from the towns, the district, information being shared on our new district website, and print media, but using the reminder in Wilbraham Hampton Times, having forums, parent forums, different times, so it's accessible to everybody, and also. We had a discussion about, having a superintendent's corner in one of the local print media, and as well as social media. So just making sure we're getting the information out, kind of what we're talking about. And then in the meantime, we would be able to provide, looking at those 4 configurations that, there were 4 configurations that every group has, that we've had consensus on about looking at that were the most feasible. So in doing so, John is going to be looking at, with his team of all the necessary people, looking at the capital needs of each of those buildings associated with those configurations, costs associated with building closures, and then he'll also be working with his team, looking at the total experience of the student, kind of what that would look like, and developing schedules. So then when we do present and have those forums, he would be able to share all of those data points and answer any questions that people have. Our next meeting is Tuesday, June 6th at 5:30 in the district conference room.
Michelle, would it be possible, Monomoy Regional is the district that you've been talking with? Mm-hmm. In light of today's information, could you please ask what their 8th grade suspension rate was prior to an 8 through 12 model, and what their 8th grade suspension rate is now?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, Finance and Operations Subcommittee.
Finance, Operations, Technology, we have a meeting scheduled for this Monday. We do have a pretty aggressive agenda for that meeting, but I think the highlights are going to be looking at wrapping up this year's budget. If you saw the document that Aaron provided, we do have some work to do on that, and then also looking at just keeping an eye on developments at the state level with regards to transportation and Chapter 70 funding. I think the Chapter 70 is pretty. I think that's pretty safe. I don't think we really have to worry about that. It's really the impact of regional transportation. It would, if they decided to take an axe to that, I think it would blow a hole in our budget that would be almost too big to recoup from. Without.
In my opinion, they already have. I mean, the Senate version, that's where they took most of the $134,000 from.
Yeah. Well, it comes down. I don't know how much the question is how much does the shortfall in anticipated revenues, how much is that going to impact the governor's push? And then again, I mean, it still has to go to conference, right? So they still have to reconcile those two budgets. It hurts, obviously, but I'd like to see that. I'd like to see that there was a commitment made at the House side, and the House is able to push what it is that they feel is appropriate, which is to deliver on what they promised with regards to transportation.
Bill, what's our total regular transportation bill?
Total regular transportation bill
Yeah,
for the
ballpark.
year?
Ballpark.
Oh my God, 2 point,
I
it was like
want to say it's about 2.5.
2.4, I was like 2.4.
Yeah, I was calling it 3.
And our shortfall is what this year?
In transportation?
40,000 if we go with 4 bus.
No.
No, you're talking about-
Gap between state, what portion are we paying? What's the dollar amount?
I'd have to look
Let me look up the cherry sheets in a second.
So while he's doing that, can I ask about the agenda that came out? And I only did that because I didn't want to respond to all of the email.
Okay.
But on the agenda that you have for the finance and operations, you have the town meeting summary.
Yep.
And I think that would have been better suited for the full committee, because, again, the purpose of subcommittees is to get tasked with things from the full committee to review and bring back to the full committee. I'm not really sure why we're gonna spend a lot of time on that. I'd rather spend it more on the financial side.
So it wasn't any particular discussion, per se. It wasn't pointed towards one or the other. There wasn't any specific things that I wanted to say, other than if anything were to be brought up at the meeting from finance or advisory pertaining to the town meeting, I would just want to make sure that it was covered.
Did they get invited to Monday's meeting? Because I know Doug hadn't received an invite when I talked to him yesterday.
They should have. It was posted, Ronnie posted this 2 days ago.
And so there's
Yesterday.
posting and then there's inviting, so.
Yesterday, she posted, she sent it to me yesterday, yeah. So I will just make sure that she,
And then the only other ask I have for you is, can you make sure that when you're asking Ronnie to do schedules, that you make sure that you go through Erin as well? Because Erin also makes sure that they're on our calendars.
okay.
Okay, so the Senate Ways and Means budget proposal has regional transportation at $1,735,246.
Can you give that number again real quick?
Yep.
Sorry.
$1,735,246.
That's from the colored sheets that Aaron had?
That's in the cherry sheet. This is right from the Department of Revenue.
Okay. And if I remember, Aaron was saying they went on the conservative side, and I think he had said it was 75%.
That's correct. I mean, one of the ironies here is that the governor's proposal was 90% reimbursement and was $1.4 million. The Senate's proposal is 90% reimbursement and is $1.7 million. So that number shouldn't change, but whatever they're using in the background is the multiplier times 0.9 is changing.
So that'd be $603.77 a rider. So I guess the question I would ask is, what if we said no to all of the regional transportation funding? The families opt out, we understand what our numbers look like, model that, and if the number is such that it's a reasonable fee, and it may not be, you say, fine, we don't want your money, you're not giving it to us anyways. And you get it from that.
So a high school student who is not eligible to have their driver's license has to use the bus, so they have to pay the whole year, and then they can drive themselves?
No, assuming it's coming up taxes.
Yeah.
That's kind of a big ask.
I'll say this.
No, because, no, what I'm saying is you're fully funded, right? So-
Right, but how do you say
model
fully
that.
funded, but if people are assuming that money's coming out of their taxes, right? You pay taxes that go into the budget for the school, that's a separate thing, you know what I mean? So.
I think it's quite common in non-regional districts for a fee to be charged.
Right, but it can be.
Yeah.
Right, but what I'm saying is, so if we were to say we didn't want the money, I would model it out and see what it looks like, because we may be sitting here getting really worked up over something that could.
Todd looks very anxious over there.
No, yeah, right, thank you. A couple of responses I would have is, this isn't on point exactly to this, but I do know that this question has been asked with respect to minimum local contribution. You know, there have been places that have said, well, you're giving us so little, you're giving us 12.5%. We don't want your minimum, you know, we don't want your 12.5%. Free us from the minimum local contribution. And the response to that has been that municipalities, this is on the municipal side, municipalities can't just pick and choose which funding programs they want to belong to. And so the enforcement was through other things. It was through the Chapter 90, which is highway funding and all other things that were related to the municipality. So I think that might be a response to this. The other thing I would say is, I know that coming from the municipal side, where we did charge for transportation, you can't divide by the whole ridership because you're required by state law to provide transportation from grades pre-K to 6. So you can only charge transportation above that road.
So 7 to 12.
7 to 12. So
They get you coming and going.
probably double that amount if you were doing it based on the total population.
I'm sure those laws were set up
But
particularly
that's
so
not
that you
what
would
I
stop
wanna know
things.
Section 68, or 7168 is written, it doesn't say, all right, I'll drop it.
I want to know why parents say.
I love
If
the, no, I
you
love
want
the
to do it,
innovation.
then ask Sean.
I want to know why parents who drive their kids to school can't apply for that as a tax write-off.
We can have this as a future agenda item as well and continue the conversation.
We don't need to.
All right.
Do you have all your answers?
Okay, what is you announced your meeting and location?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
5 o'clock IRC.
Thank you. So we will move on to the collaborative.
IRC?
No.
Sorry,
Not IRC,
admin office,
we're
sorry.
in the IRC for the curriculum.
Sorry.
Okay, so Lisa's unable to be here, but I'm going to provide her update. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, they interviewed applicants for the position, or the equivalent to superintendent. So tonight was their deliberations to send candidates to be interviewed by the executive board, and they interviewed 8 applicants. Any questions? So I have nothing to report on the corporation side or negotiation subcommittee, policy subcommittee, Maura.
No, nothing to report.
Okay, so we'll move on to consent agenda.
Motion to approve. Second.
Okay, any discussion or questions? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Just make note that Bill wasn't here for that vote.
Okay, so motion carries 5-0. So move on to the superintendent's update.
Okay, you've already gotten half of it, so this will be brief. Work on the new district website continues to ramp up. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Fine and Performing Arts Department and their students for their work to collect assets this week. They've been all over the district collecting still shots, B-roll footage, and aerial photography using the new drone they purchased to help with this project. Also been working with the vendor and website review and evaluation team to identify key themes for the new website and to eliminate dated, inoperable, and redundant content from the website. Let me tell you, there's a lot of that. I think I've gotten about 50% of the way through that. I've run into the student handbook at least a dozen times. It has been a lot more work than I could have imagined. But Aaron keeps telling me the result is worth it. And I'm sure it will be. I'm keeping the vision of streamlined, sleek, and attractive in the forefront of my mind as I interface with everyone who's been a part of this work.
Please, I hope you don't say that to people.
So now let me circle back to the report I set aside at the last meeting because I felt it was important to pause in appreciation of all the good things that had happened that night. And I'm afraid this may be the part where I start to get into a little bit of edgy speak, so apologies in advance. I'm happy to report that we're getting started on the final major strategic plan initiative scheduled for this year, which is addressing the gaps that prevent us from implementing a viable multi-tiered system of support. For anyone who may know, the concept of tiered interventions has a celebrated history in the field of public health, long before it was ever considered as a way to arrange educational service delivery for students. So, Dr. Bontempi, feel free to back me up and correct me if I'm making mistakes with my medical analogy here. But we have all experienced tiered interventions many times, such as the monitoring systems that are in place to make sure we're not exposed to contaminated food or water that could make us sick. This is an example of what we call primary prevention. It's often the most simple and cost-effective way to prevent problems, but they're not foolproof. And so we also have medications available to help people who do come into contact with something that makes them sick. It's a secondary prevention. And those are also not usually universally effective, so there are surgery and other treatments for people who need really unique care after exposure to something. So as you climb the tiers, you're providing increasingly intensive interventions to increasingly smaller groups of people. Just one example, a lot of our health systems set up to work that way. Concept came into education through two routes. The first was a search for methods to address managing and remediating behavior, where the goal is to find the least aversive, effective treatment, which is not unlike the health data's concept of seeking the least invasive, effective medical interventions. So people saw attention and said, oh, maybe you can do this through tiered systems. Second path was through school psychology, where there was a desire to find a less biased way of identifying students with learning disabilities, because psychologists were noting that the tests they were using were very predictably always identifying the same types of kids with learning disabilities. And so they thought the bias in the test is throwing this out. In fact, issues of disproportionality have been a problem in special education since its inception, but that's a topic for another time. So the basic MTSS concept is that the overall educational service delivery model should be arranged so that interventions are layered on. Everyone needs access to core instructions that's known to be highly effective for most students. Analogous, the example I gave to making sure that everyone has healthy food and water. Currently, we have that in place through most of the district, especially with the core programs we adopted this year. You also need a monitoring system. We currently have universal screening measures in place, which are another component. We also need tiered scheduling, because if you're going to provide some tiered interventions, you need time and day in order to do that. And we have tiered schedules, at least at the elementary school. So we've got a lot of pieces in place, but what we're really missing is the intervening layers of support between the general education classroom and special education. So we're good at providing core instruction. We're good at providing special education instruction. But for the kids who need something in between, we're really at a loss. And that results in some students not getting the support they need, while other students get more support than they need. Both situations are detrimental to kids and not the most cost-effective way to run a system. So the plan for the strategic plan for the next 2 years is to work on getting our MTSS system in place. A little bit concerned about that because the research says it takes 5 years to get MTSS into place. But we do have some components, so we're not building from ground zero. As you heard tonight, the district leadership team has identified 2 self-assessments that they'll be using with their building-based teams before the end of the year. That'll be a way of allowing us to more precisely dial in on what resources we have that we can use for the MTS and what's missing that we're going to have to acquire some way, again, in this era of very limited resources to try to build the system. But it will be money well invested, because if we can treat problems at a lower level and a less resource-intensive level in special education, we will be saving a lot of money in the long run. So I hope we find a way, in spite of all our limitations, to fund this. It will be something that yields benefits, financial benefits, and learning benefits for students and for the district leaders.
Maybe.
Thank you. Just in terms of Title I, in that you have the regular kids and then special ed, where would Title I fit into that model?
So one of the issues that we have with Title I in the district is what's known as a targeted intervention district. When you have the insufficient level of students who are identified as economically needy, you cannot use Title I funds across the district in a tiered way. You can only target them for students who are who qualify because of their economic need, which makes it another patchwork. Now, I have worked in districts, the threshold is 40%. I've worked in a lot of districts where more than 40% of the kids were identified as students with economic need. And at that point, you can use your Title I dollars for an MTSS system because the thinking is that once you reach 40%, the influence of poverty is so pervasive that all students are affected, even students who aren't experiencing poverty in the daily lives. But that's not us.
So we're going to move on to future agenda items.
Do we do the consent agenda?
You already did go
Okay,
over.
I was following it.
That was put in the notes, don't worry about it.
What was it? Okay, we made the minutes.
She put biological.
9:25, disappears into the laboratory.
Does anyone have anything else to add for future agenda item?
Yeah, so actually, John had just had said something very interesting, and it brought back a subject that we had talked about years and years ago, and that is, re-engaging the public, and, we've had multiple conversations about it. I'd like to bring it back around again, because I thought John's idea was actually pretty innovative, where, we're sending out emails all the time, and how hard would it be, because we have, Mr. Sanders is here, for most meetings, and he provides the recordings for public access. Is it possible for us to establish a system where we can indeed email every parent within the district and just send them a link? And, here's a link to the last school committee meeting, or to the last finance committee meeting, the last curriculum meeting. So I'd like to get other ways in which we can engage the community using both digital media as well as print.
And Bill, with the new website, we're going to be able to do the Connect Ed and the website, and I'll be able to put it in one place, but it can go out to all the pages, it can go on the website.
We could probably put all of that stuff that'll be in its own home versus trying to figure out where it is, so that might just answer that
A lot
problem.
easier to access it.
Yep.
Anybody else?
Just a reminder on that safety audit, that's done in executive session, and there were comments made tonight that really should be kept in executive session because it spoke to results of the safety audit.
Thank you.
John, you may or may not know this before I ask for it to be added, but have we gotten a dollar figure for what the light expense was?
As I said, I think the most comparable we're going to have will be the month after the lights went off, so I will get you those bills. The last time I looked at them, the bill wasn't in yet, but I think it was at this point.
I'm just looking for the dollar figure,
Right.
because I know that there were FOIA requests put in by members of Wilbraham community that were shared with members in the Hampton community that were like bar graphs, which was also shared with Aaron to understand what the dollar amount applied to that was, and I think folks thought that there would be some sort of piece of information that would come from that, but it has not.
Okay.
So if we could take that as an action item.
Okay, anything else?
Motion to adjourn?
Second, third.
We'll do roll call vote. Bill?
Aye.
Cheryl? Sean?
Aye.
Patrick?
Aye.
Lauren?
I
Myself, I work for the 9th